favorites. Yeah.
I do. I'm very fortunate she's going to speak.
Okay, Jake, looks like we're live. Check the video. Okay, let's start. Everybody ready? Let's go ahead and get started. The Centerville City Council is now in session. Thank you for your patience as we arranged our IT system so we can record all of your comments and got our video system going so that those who are not with us tonight can see this meeting. We've just completed a work session where we reviewed some of the financial issues and budget for next year. We'll start tonight. We'll note for the record that all members of the City Council are here, and we are grateful to have so many of you with us in attendance. It's always nice to have so many citizens join us. We'll note that all members of the City Council are here. We'd like to start tonight with a Pledge of Allegiance, and we've asked Scouts Spencer Reese and Vance Moser if they would jointly lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So as they come up, you can follow their instructions to stand and repeat the pledge. You guys got this?
Will the audience please rise? Please repeat the Pledge of Allegiance after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The audience may be seated.
Thank you. You guys did an excellent job. You can come back anytime for this. And Reverend Briggs is not with us, and we've asked Stephanie if she would provide a prayer or a thought.
I'm happy to. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet together this evening. We're grateful for the freedoms of this country, for the beauties of the area where we live, and for the opportunity of self-government. We are grateful for our citizens, for their concern and the opportunity to serve them. We're grateful for our first responders and pray for thy blessing upon them this evening and throughout their activities, that they and their families may be blessed for the efforts that they provide to allow us to enjoy safety and peace. Wilt thou guide and direct us this evening, that we can have wisdom in the things we do, that we can discuss thoroughly the issues at hand and find the best way to proceed. We love thee, we thank thee for our blessings, and pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Tonight we have two different public hearings scheduled. One regarding uses on Main Street, and then also a public hearing later around Founders Park, the renaming of Founders Park. If you are here to speak on either of those issues, we'd invite you to speak during the public hearing time for those. But we also hold an open session at the beginning of each meeting where anyone can speak on any matter of municipal concern. We'll open that open session now and invite anyone who would like to speak, not on those items that are scheduled for a public hearing, to speak to us. We'd ask that you state your name and city of residence for the record as required by law, and keep your comments to approximately 2 minutes. The public hearing, or the open session, is now open. Is there anyone who would like to speak to us?
You got a cap on this thing. Very nice.
Yeah, we make some improvements around here. It takes a long time, but I think Lisa sacrificed hers so that we could hear better.
My name is Dale McIntyre. I live at 258 East 200 South Centerville. You're having so many city council meetings recently that I'm not sure which meeting this happened in, but I heard a spirited defense of the concept of buffering when it comes to zoning. And I went home after that and I thought about that. And I thought, what has the result of zoning, buffering been? Is there a case where buffering took a residential high zone and lowered it to residential medium? Or one where it took residential medium zone and lowered it to residential low? And I don't think there is. Apparently the purpose of buffering is not to lower density, but to raise density. And I am not really in favor of that concept. Perhaps there's a battle going on here between the concept of buffering and the general plan, in which the people of Centerville have very well voiced their opinion that all residential zoning in Centerville should be residential low. In my opinion, the concept of buffering in zoning implements the will of the developers and the planners, and it circumvents the will of the citizens of Centerville.
Thank you. You got to be quick.
Sorry. I have my own public comment, but I was also asked to read this comment from Dean Williams.
Heather, can you give us your name?
My name is Heather Strasser. I live at 434 South 600 West. This comment is from Dean Williams, who lives in Centerville as well. He's a retired battalion chief of the West Valley City Fire Department after 37 years. He says, I was talking to some of the South Davis Fire District members last week about the rezoning of the development on West, he says Parish Lane, but I think he meant Porter Lane. They told me about a medical emergency that they had in the Brighton Homes development. The standard dispatch for a medical is the equipment out of the Centerville Fire Station, which includes a fire engine and an ambulance. On this medical, a paramedic unit was also dispatched out of Bountiful. Because of the narrow street and the vehicle congestion, the paramedics were the third unit in and had to park 3 buildings away and carry all their equipment the distance to the home. If this call is for a heart attack, a tonic-clonic seizure, an overdose, choking, allergic reaction, or insulin shock, time is extremely critical and the life-saving drugs the paramedics carry cannot be delayed. We cannot continue to approve this kind of development with narrow streets, one street in and out, which is proposed, and the congestion it creates. Imagine if one of the units would have been on fire. Supporting fire equipment will never make it to the fire. I can only speak with expert testimony on the impact of the fire department response, but you can extend this to garbage removal, package delivery, snow removal, moving vans, family parties, public works, police response, etc. Footnote, if the council wants to know why so much equipment is sent, it is for the manpower that is on the equipment. Centerville runs a 2-person fire engine and a 2-person ambulance. The paramedics for Centerville come from Bountiful. Unless we have a significant increase in the budget for the fire district, we cannot put paramedics in every fire station. There is also a critical shortage of paramedics in Utah. Salt Lake City Fire is offering paramedics from other departments a lateral transfer with their seniority and pay and giving them a $10,000 a year raise. Okay, and this is my comment. It seems that each time a request is made to upzone an area in our city, the citizens speak out against it. You as the city council have been given the responsibility to listen to the citizens of Centerville. You as the council have the power to change our ordinances to better reflect the desires of our citizens. Developers are asking for amendments to our zoning code because it allows them greater profits. Developers are in the business of making money, so it makes sense that developers would ask for these changes. However, maximizing developer profits at the cost of Centerville's quality of life is not in the best interest of Centerville's citizens who live here, support our community, and make Centerville a great place to live. It has now become urgent that our zoning code is updated in all areas of Centerville, including the Southwest neighborhood. Our zoning ordinances should reflect the desires of the citizens who live in Centerville, not what is most profitable for developers. Please use the responsibility you have been given to listen to your constituents and act to effectively protect our city now. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
Okay, Dave Numbers, 1023 North Main, Centerville. I was invited to come here by Paul and Robin. And anyways, I was just telling her that about 2001, my artesian well was dried up by Centerville because they drilled a big well higher up on the hill. And I was in Texas at the time, so I didn't, at the time, I just can't see why I should have paid $2,000 to hook up the city water and go to the expense of running city water into my house and then pay a bill which just went up to $25, 25 something a month now. And I shouldn't be paying anything for city water since mine was stolen. That's just one thing. And then I'd like to see Centerville, all the streets, parks, all those, to take care of their own business. We have enough people working for Centerville that Centerville ought to take care of everything that needs to be done instead of farming it out and just upping our taxes just for fun. If taxes don't cover Centerville's expenses, what do you think my lousy money that I get now covers?
Thank you, Mr. Numbers. Anyone else would like to speak?
Tracy James, Centerville, 598 East, 100 South. Been here a couple times. Just back as a reminder that on your agenda, I would hope to see the retention pond back on your agenda. I spoke with Tony at the county, and he says that he's kicked it back to you. So that was as of Thursday. So hence the reason I'm here.
We kicked it back to them late this afternoon.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we're hoping to have it on our agenda August 15th.
Sounds like a good volley.
There's nothing we would like more than to get that done.
Fair enough. And by the way, I think you do a fantastic job, and if my taxes go up to help take care of roads, I'm there to help pay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to be heard? Seeing none, we'll close the open session and move on to the next items on our agenda. We have some minutes to review and accept. The June 18th work session and council meeting minutes, and then the July 25th special meeting minutes. And I had...
Mayor, could I start by noting that the header on page 2 and 3 of the work session minutes on the 18th has the wrong date, so we'll just correct those dates.
Thank you.
The city council, I noticed a couple of errors. My screen has blacked out.
Which meeting?
The city council.
I have one too on the 18th.
You go first, we'll see if my
So
screen
I
shows
have
up.
on line 29, page 8, it said, I think it said 3-to-1 vote, and it should have been 4-to-1 vote.
Well, the first one that was a 3-to-1
Right.
vote was a 3-to-1 vote because George had recused himself, but the minutes don't reflect that George had recused himself.
Well,
so-
this one says members Ince, McEwen, and Meekum all voted.
So that's the second one, okay, yeah. So that one should be a 4.
So that's line 29 on page 8, right? Saying that should be 4-1.
Right.
Yeah, but then there's, at the page above that,
The prior page?
the prior page, where it's going to say 3-to-1, right there, that one is a 3-to-1 vote because
Which line?
we just need to add that somewhere in that report of that item, we need to add that George McEwen had recused himself. And that's why it was a 4-person vote.
I think you could just say with one abstention or one
Recusal.
recusal.
Well, yeah, I think, though, that Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when there's a recusal, it probably ought to indicate recusal, not just abstention.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
If
Yeah.
you could specifically indicate that Councilmember McEwen recused himself from the voting.
I had noted both of those. In addition, back on the work session notes, which is page 2 of the work session, where we said where we're talking about the Proposition 1 grant program and the programs that we'd suggested. I had originally made a note here that we should add that the county provided feedback that sidewalk repairs within a city were a city responsibility and would not score well. However, later I see in the regular meeting minutes there was more of a discussion on that. But does the council feel like it's worth? We mentioned that we explained these, but we didn't record the council's.
I do think it is
reaction.
worth recording, so if someone's reading just that portion.
Right. I think we should specifically call out that was Commissioner Milburn that said, unless it has regional significance, that they were not interested in it.
Yeah. That's correct.
So I can provide a specific language, or repeat that again, or.
I wasn't there. It would be Marcia doing this.
Do you want to take the notes for Marcia?
If you have specific language, that would be helpful.
I do.
And, but there were two thoughts there we want to capture. One is that Milburn said it was sidewalks would not be eligible. And what was the second one?
Well, projects that were
regional.
not of regional significance would not be considered, and that's where sidewalks came into that. But
And that was particularly contrary to what they had told you before.
Yeah.
Well, I had spoken with one of the staff before. That was based on a conversation with staff.
Okay.
Yeah. At the county.
So if folks are find those amendments acceptable, I'd look for a motion to approve the work session minutes as amended, the council meeting minutes as amended, and the July 25th special meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded, we approve those minutes as amended. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next up is the zoning map amendment for the Porter Lane, 640 West Porter Lane. This was tabled from the July 18th meeting with the direction to staff to gather additional information. I believe Steve and Corey, you've got some of our experts here to review those. Corey, are you going to provide us the staff update on that?
Let me lead out.
Okay.
I actually wrote the summary based on the discussion with staff, and that staff included Corey, our city community development director, Randy Randall, our public works director, Kevin Campbell, our city engineer, our city attorney, Lisa Romney, and our assistant planner, Cassie Younger. So this was the summary of that. But we have Kevin and Randy in the back as well as Corey up here if there are questions about any of that. Randy did mention that he may need to clarify something that I wrote about the water pressure, culinary water pressure. Do you want to come forward, Randy, and clarify that just so we get that out of the way to begin with?
And then we'll ask Kevin to comment on the traffic and the road condition.
Steve mentioned in his letter that it was 77 pounds. That's 77 pounds at this elevation, not down where the development is. And so the recording that we took is up here and not down there. And so it only varies about 10 pounds, and most of the variance is when we turn our wells on and off. It creates greater pressure to push it up to the reservoirs. So there's very little fluctuation in the water system during the day, anytime. We looked at the last month, and the water pressure is fairly constant. So the line size from our reservoirs down, we have 14-inch lines, 10-inch lines that serve all the way down to there. So we wouldn't expect there to be any pressure differential. Not like this.
So Randy, to clarify then, the 77 pound per square inch reading, which you said was the lowest reading in that area over the past month, was upstream a ways.
Yeah, it's up
here. It would be even more, it would be higher downstream.
Higher down there.
Yes.
And you need to recognize that the state regulations, we have to maintain 40 PSI in the water system, so we far exceed that down there. Anywhere within the system, we always maintain at least 45, 50 pounds everywhere. So the pressure is plenty adequate.
Thank you for that explanation. Any other thoughts about what might, some of the residents have complained about fluctuating water pressure? Is that normal during the development process, but not long-term?
No, I don't know of any. We could see there may have been some fluctuation in the irrigation, but not for culinary use. Culinary, there shouldn't have been any, unless they'd turn it off, for example, to tie in or something like that temporarily. But that's the only thing we would know of locally. The line size is definitely not an issue long-term. There could have been a valve maybe off during construction if that's what they saw, but that's not a long-term situation.
Yeah,
Thanks.
the irrigation company has had a PRV, which is a pressure reducing valve, that has had problems this year at Porter Lane. So they've reported to have maintenance issues and pressure problems in the southwest quadrant of the city throughout the year. It's not a line size issue, but really a maintenance issue. They've had, again, a valve go down that affected pressure in that part of the city. And so they've really, they have plenty of pressure. Their PRVs are along Main Street, so first east, you're going to see pretty high pressures. Just west of Main Street irrigation, you're going to see some of their lower pressures, but as you get down towards Frontage Road, the pressures get up around 90, 100 PSI. They have plenty of pressure down in these areas.
They are putting in some new water lines across Main Street this year as well to increase the volume across the street. So we've had a lot that's been off this year for irrigation services. So this year you might see some reduced because of construction for them. They're doing a lot of construction this year on Main Street.
Any concerns about the long-term ability to serve that area adequately?
Dual Creek didn't mention any issues. This particular property already has an irrigation service, so they said that they could easily serve this property with irrigation. One comment they made is when properties are actually zoned from agricultural or maybe low density to a higher density or commercial, their usage actually goes down because the landscaping requirements are less. So for maybe a medium density, you might require 20% landscaping, whereas a single family development there, usually around 50% landscaping or so. Those are some general numbers, but that was some of the comments and feedback that they gave us.
Thank you. We had road surface damage on here as one of the concerns, and also pedestrian safety. Any comments there that concern, or any issues there that concern you?
Definitely during construction of the Porter Walton townhomes, there were issues. There were several trenches. One was a gas trench. One was a sewer trench that settled, and those were picked up before we entered warranty in the development. We made them roto-mill the edges of the road and overlay areas that weren't draining properly. So I would say definitely during construction there were several issues that affected the Porter Lane. We believe all of those issues have been solved, and they're in warranty now, so we'll check it again prior to end of warranty.
You do have sidewalks from the frontage road all the way up to 4th West on the north side that are already installed. Nothing on the south side yet. Until we put curb and gutter on that side, there won't be any sidewalk there. So,
but long-term, if we get that, the project with the county to put that in an enclosed
culvert, then we will be putting
sidewalk there.
Correct.
On the west.
That's correct.
On the
south side. Correct.
And we don't necessarily have a time frame for that project.
We do not.
Well, I think, let me just caution you on that statement. I didn't want him to create an expectation that as soon as the county encloses that channel, if that in fact happens, that we'll be improving that road, because that would have to be the city's funds, and whether that's a priority for the expenditure of those funds or not.
There's quite a bit of land that's undeveloped along there that would pay for their frontage. We would want them to pay for it, but someday,
yeah,
Steve's exactly right.
Long-term, I think
long-term,
you better assume long-term.
Correct.
Last thing, you raised some concerns about the stormwater damage. excuse me, stormwater drainage and the ability to drain property off that property.
Yeah, the property does slope to the back about 2 feet. The concern is, can they get water to Porter Lane or can they get it west? Porter Lane has a major gas line, and trying to get the water to the south may be very difficult. Getting it west, they have to go through some private properties. They may have to get easements from those people in order to get the water to travel through their pieces of property. So I think that's probably one of the greatest things that they may have to overcome. They may have to work with the property owners in order to get that ability to get the water from the east to the west. If they built the property up, they may be able to get it at the front, but they may need a lot of fill in order to do that. And so that's a concern we have. How much fill will it take in order to run the water from the back of the property, or are they going to go west? Our facilities are adequate along the frontage road to handle the storm drain water. It's just the conveyance and the opportunity or the right to go across somebody else's property with those storm drain systems.
So maybe I'll ask Lisa, at what point during the process, the development process, is it appropriate to say, hey, these issues, we need a plan to mitigate issues? Can that be a concern at the change of zoning time, or just at a site plan type of?
The ordinances do allow and provide as part of the criteria in a rezone to look at the utilities and facilities, but the standard is just to make sure that the facilities are adequate. And so I think what's been represented here is that even on the storm drain, the facilities are adequate. It's whether it's filled or how they get those lines to the city facilities will be determined as part of the development approval, which is the next step.
Council, any questions for our staff who've been researching these issues?
Kevin does have some stuff on the traffic, if you're interested in the traffic studies that were done on 4th West, so.
Yes, both reports were attached to the agenda. The developer had Reeves and Associates do a report. They came up with level of service C for the intersection of 400 West and Porter Lane, which basically means about a 15 to 20 second delay per vehicle. The city had that report verified by A-Trans. A-Trans said that they generally agree with the findings of Reeves, but they actually upgraded the level of service from their numbers. I believe the police department got those counts for them. And this was after school had started. So the idea was that, well, wait a minute, let's take some more counts after the high school's in session at the intersection. They actually upgraded the level of service during the weekdays to level of service B, but on Saturday, the peak was in the afternoon and evening, and the level of service was C for Saturday evening. They also studied Bolano Way and 400 West, and that's an area of concern as well. That's a different issue.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Lisa, would it be appropriate to ask you to clarify what the council's options on this are? You have an applicant who's applied for a zoning change.
Randy, can I get you to come back for 1 minute? So there's a fairly dramatic difference in perception between residents' comments down in Shayla Park and your comments about water pressure. Now, recognizing that people can have a tendency to exaggerate comments to make their point, okay? And I'm certainly guilty of that on occasion. They're probably not completely up in the night about perceiving differences in water pressure. Can you shed any light on it?
Yeah, most people have pressure regulators in their home, and they may have problems. We have quite a few people every year that have water pressure problems based upon their own water system, because their pressure regulators may fail, may stick shut, or they may be using PEX pipe, for example, that's undersized, and so they may find water pressures based upon those things. And we'd be glad to come take a look if people are having water pressures. We're unaware of anybody that's had specific water pressure, especially today, if somebody's having water pressure. We're talking about culinary. I don't know about irrigation, whether they've had problems. A valve could be off. So if there's somebody that's having water pressure, it could be even a main valve that's off. Somebody could have shut it off. We oftentimes may have an irrigation company that shuts off the wrong valve or turns it down. That's a possibility. We're talking in general, we know the water system has plenty of pressure. There's no question about that. So it could be somebody is having something and they need to contact us. We'd be glad to come out and see that pressure. We can even record the pressure to see the system's pressure, or we can record their own pressure. We'd be glad to do that if somebody's having problems. So, okay.
Great. So Lisa, can I, or Bill, if that covers your question, can I ask Lisa again? We have an applicant who's applied for a zoning change. They chose to apply for residential medium as opposed to maybe a commercial zone. What leeway or options does the council have here? Straight up or down? Yes or no?
Essentially, yes. You have before you a zoning map amendment that's applicant-driven. They're requesting residential medium. So this is a legislative decision, which is subject to the reasonably debatable standard. But essentially, you need to look at your ordinances. There's 4 factors that you look at for a rezone decision. The first one is to look to your general plan, which the staff report discusses the compliance with this application with the general plan. The second one is whether it's harmonious with the overall character of the existing development in the vicinity. Obviously, that's one that you can consider. It is adjacent to commercial and immediately adjacent to other residential medium projects. And then the extent that the zoning may adversely affect adjacent properties, again, something for you to consider. And the adequacy of the facilities, as we've discussed. So staff has analyzed it and is recommending approval of this because it meets those factors, but again, it's a legislative decision. In my opinion, on applicant-driven applications, it's best to either to approve or deny. Sometimes we have gone with a different zoning, but you know, they're not really requesting commercial or residential low, so I think it's better to just approve or deny. But again, the ordinance has been prepared for approval with findings for approval and why it meets the ordinances. So if you're inclined to deny, you will have to come up with your own findings to support any such decision and why it doesn't meet those factors. And I think, as we discussed last time, you need to analyze this in light of the current general plan provisions and the current ordinances, because they're vested in the rules that are in place at the time of their application.
Thank you. Council, what would you like to do?
Well, if no one else is jumping in, I have a few points I'd like to make. These are difficult decisions. I know that that sometimes these issues make people unhappy, and maybe it's easy to tag the decision makers as people who have ill intent or trying to please the wrong people. I would say that although sometimes it might feel like, for me specifically, we haven't heard or responded to the concerns, I believe there's many evidences that as a council we absolutely have. One of those examples is through the Main Street process. The densities there got reduced greatly. We revisited the entire Southeast Neighborhood General Plan to put in securities there. The greatest responsibility that I feel is consistency in the way that principles are applied in decision-making. And that's the main point that I want to make today. So, for an example, we heard tonight about buffering being a problematic principle to apply. We do, in evaluating the Southeast General Plan, we do have one section that, the Southeast Neighborhood General Plan, we do have one section of very, very single-family home residential area that is zoned residential medium. And because I've heard the citizens regularly say this neighborhood should not be denser than residential low, I asked the council, well, when we were visiting that, why is this remained residential medium? And the answer that I received is buffering, to buffer around City Hall. So if we're going to be consistent in applying principles, then I think that we need to look at those principles that we apply everywhere. I read back on the minutes of when the Shayla Park was approved, and the Planning Commission and representatives of the city at that time felt very tentative about doing that because they knew there'd be pushback. They knew that that was a change, and it was growth, and it was different for Centerville. But the decision makers decided that there was a market need and that wonderful people would come by that housing and live in Centerville, like Heather here. She lives here in Centerville in Shayla Park, a residential medium neighborhood development right in this area. So why would we change the principles in allowing her to live in a residential medium neighborhood from then to now, when we have even more need and more population growth? Jake, could you pull up those pictures? The other thing is I went and visited the site myself, and the other thing that I received a couple of emails complaining about the things that I said last time and recommending, asking us to leave this and not make this change to residential medium. And one of the things we hear is we want to protect the character of the area. Could you make those go large, starting with the first one? So again, in trying to, no, at the top.
Yeah, just a second.
So again, in trying to apply principles in a consistent way, we have residents from Shayla Park asking us to protect the character of what's surrounding them. This is what's directly across the street right now. This is the property in question. Go ahead. Okay, well, this is the property in question then, which is just east of that. So that's what it is right now. That's what it is right now. That's what's directly west of it, 2 houses west. That's standing in the middle of the street right in front of the question property, very loud freeway noises right next to the commercial. That's what's directly west of the Shayla Park, across the street from the property in question. Again, directly south of the property in question. And then these two are just a bit east of the property in question. Now this is Shayla Park, which is, we've heard from a lot of the residents, this is a residential medium development, and we've heard from a lot of the residents to protect the character and quality of that neighborhood. And so then keep going. This is Shayla Park looking across north. And this is the Brighton Townhomes development that we've gotten many complaints from, the Shayla Park. The road does go narrower, that's for sure. But there's the quality of looking at that home compared to the other homes. Next. Okay. So I'm not trying to not listen to requests, and I'm trying to do exactly, in the principles that I stand for, we've heard that we want residential low, but we have to look at the specifics of each location in each situation. Otherwise, we're being irresponsible. And Heather said tonight that we need to act immediately to effectively protect this area. And in encouraging the approval of this change to residential medium, that is exactly my intent, is to protect the character of this area, because I'm a southeast neighborhood resident myself. I live directly east, right off Porter Lane, directly east of this. And I think that the greatest risk in southeast Centerville is blight and neglect and not allowing some positive redevelopment and some positive change. And when that's residential low in areas that residential low makes sense, like the Centerville Elementary neighborhood, I think that that's fantastic. That's exactly what we should do. But in areas that are surrounded by these other uses that aren't residential low, that's my point for tonight, is for this specific area. I have not ignored or not heard the calls for residential low, but in this specific area, I just don't see how that can make sense. I think those were my points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Anyone else want to comment?
Well, I feel very different from Tammy. I have listened to the residents, and I have been down and looked at the areas. I think that there was a mistake made when we let Brighton Homes, which I was not a part of. It seems way too dense. I don't think it's a safe area. I think that it can be developed in a very nice way, but with the zoning options that we have right now, I think residential medium is just too high.
I agree with Robin. I think the problems that Dean Williams' letter illustrated that Heather read in the open session just go to confirm the feeling that I've had that what happened with the Hafoka property with that with that development was a mistake, and to do two next to each other would be more of a mistake, and two negatives make a positive in math, but not in zoning. So I'm not comfortable going ahead with this.
I think the primary issue for me is what dictates impact on surrounding areas, and do you look strictly across the street, or do you look at the zone immediately surrounding it in terms of how far out do you go before you say this has no impact? And every time you increase density, you create an impact, and it's more than just the next door neighbors. It's how many parking spots are available in the grocery store. It goes outward from there. My concern with where we are as a city as a whole, and this falls into it as well, is how much do we pack into the town as a whole, and so that's a broader issue as far as impact. But when I look at the whole question of, well, developers want to maximize their profit, property owner wants to be able to do what they want to do with their property, it really comes down to is that from the perspective of both a resident and as a citizen legislator, I do not feel that it is my responsibility to ensure a maximum profit for a developer. I don't. Now, by contrast, there is a development right now in Farmington. It's called Farmington Bungalows, which actually has $500,000 homes that abut right up against the freeway, which is, when I looked at those homes, I'm thinking, who would build a custom home right here against the freeway? And the answer is land value. You know, people want to live in that area. They live in that area. So when it comes to the consideration of market, I don't know that necessarily all options are off the table if you say no to a residential medium. I do also have concerns with drainage. We have had problems in other areas in town. We had a gentleman come and show us lots of photos how he's been flooded out by another development. And where, as it stands right now, we're talking an easement or a significant move to the property even to get that to remove the stormwater. It's a concern.
The fact that we're looking at this particular neighborhood is an additional concern. The city as a whole has added a lot of units in the last little while, but they're all concentrated in this area. And so the impact on these neighbors is much greater than it is to those where I live or where you live or where Bill lives. That none of us here on the council have the impact that the citizens in Shayla Park have, because we just don't have that concentration right near us. I just don't feel comfortable voting for it.
So I have a couple questions. One is for Corey and one is for the council. In this particular situation with this long, skinny strip of land, what do you imagine we would be able to say yes to? Corey, is that is there room for a city street plus homes there? And would we have the same difficulties of it's a cul-de-sac and certain length, et cetera?
Well, I think it's a combination of design and opinion. Could you fit a city street on the property with a cul-de-sac? Yes. Could you create lots that are viable? Probably not. You look at the number of units. If you're looking at adding a public street, you're adding the cost of that public street versus the number of units that you're willing to allow there. So again, it's another opinion. You're creating an impact, this case, on density, but you're creating an impact on taking care of a street now with a lesser density. So it's just a matter of which one you want to do.
Are you also referring to commercial viability too?
Right. I personally have assessed that that would not be viable because it's off the frontage road, and Porter Lane is not a highly trafficked street and commercially viable.
Except just below, you just showed us that there is commercial, just the very next lot down.
Two homes down, and it's quite a ways off the frontage road.
Probably not retail, but you look across the way and you've got storage units, so.
But just down below,
You
you
want
have
more
the pool,
storage units.
the pool place. You have the property right below that is all.
And this is
commercial.
much more narrow. So again, if a city street can't get you to the back behind part, then what can it be used for? So, and to the council, to Lisa's point, this is a legislative decision. There's a lot of flexibility, but I would ask, what's your reasonably debatable justification to letting residential medium all the way back in 1998, Shayla Park happened there, and those people have happily lived there. And what's changed between then and now that we draw the line? And isn't the desire
the percentage of units?
Isn't the desire to draw the line though always there? It's always there. As soon as we move in, then that's enough change. But change happened for us to be able to move into.
Can I get Corey back? So I'm missing something. Is it the width of a private development townhouse type street versus a public street that, in your view, makes the individual lots probably not viable, but the townhouse lots viable?
Yes and a no. I mean, if you look at a public street, you're looking at 50 feet of right-of-way, and you're looking at somewhere 70, 80 feet width on the property to start. But then you're looking at a 100-foot radius of a cul-de-sac at the end with the pie-shaped lots. You can only go 400 feet with the cul-de-sac. So now you have a long leftover piece on the north end if you put in a public street. Lots going off of that street are now very skinny in depth. And so now you have a shape of a house that has to be linear along the street. And that's where I think it's not viable for a public street. The issue,
but it would be viable for a
the issue of a private
development.
street is kind of this misunderstanding. If you have a multifamily development, you do not have to put in a public street. There's no requirement to put in a public street. You can just create banks of parking lots and buildings with multifamily. So if you think the best way to think of that maybe is look at Pioneer on the stacked flats that are on the south end, southwest end. You have a public street going up through, but on the back side you have a parking lot. That's a multifamily parking lot. So when you build multifamily, normally you build those type of parking lots. So there's no public street, it's a driveway, drive aisles, and parking stalls. That's typical of a multifamily development. Where Brighton is different, what happened on the Hofoka, that actually is encouraged by staff and also encouraged by the Planning Commission during the review. Because we could have built multifamily in a medium density with just buildings and parking lots. And what we tried is not to build that. So if you take narrow down the road is true of the Pioneer, now take the townhomes of Pioneer, that's a public street We narrowed down that public street because this was private. You build the base and everything to city standards so it doesn't fall apart, but you can narrow it down. And we narrowed it down to what the fire codes allow. So there might be too narrow, there might be some feelings that that looks kind of dense, but that was a preferred style even for mine today. It's preferred for that area in that community not to have stacked flats and parking lots. It was better to create a private road in a U-shaped and have the typical townhouse look to the multifamily. They did not have to do that. Brighton went ahead and did that and met the fire codes in doing so. So in my opinion, and I'm not a voting member, but my opinion, the FOCA property is a better development than what they could have done under medium density. So you do have the value of medium density. Whenever you allow medium density, they have very flexible designs. And to get the conditional use, both staff and the Planning Commission went with a roadway design because that was a better fit with the neighborhood, and we met with the fire district. So I know that we have comments about fire experts coming here, but if you go to the fire codes, the FOCA property met the fire codes that were in place at the time that developed. And it's a better, in my opinion, it's better to have a street there with townhomes than a parking lot with stacked flats in the medium. So now you're having something else coming in, and preliminarily they're looking at some type of private road leading so they can develop the property, and preliminarily townhomes. But again, they don't have to do that. They could just simply do a parking lot design. Now the issue of density is where we had the ability of negotiating power on the FOCA property. They wanted something above 4 units an acre because they're capped at 8. They went with 7.56 is I think is what their density is. And to get the 7.56, we negotiated using the CUP, the roadway design and a townhome design rather than a typical apartment style. And that's how we bettered the project under the current codes that were in place.
You're right, it could have been worse. Are there any options to better this project, given that it's such a small piece of project?
Yes, that's what your CUP will do, is you'll go back in and start looking at it and find the best way to run your accesses, to run your street. If you went through and did a medium, we're back to the process. Are they doing a permitted use density? Because they pretty much drive the vehicle of what they're going to develop with a permitted use density. If they move to the conditional use density, we can start adding some other elements into play under that CUP and start negotiating a design that best fits that property. And I can't say what's the best one yet.
And for the audience, you remind the permitted use versus the conditional use, which is additional.
Yeah, permitted use in residential medium is they have 4 units an acre and they build anything they want. As long as they meet the minimum design standards, the codes, they build whatever they want. If you move to the CUP, which is 5 to 8, you have additional negotiation, additional regulation, additional impact that you can start negotiating with the developer. And for staff and the developer, they want the maximum. For staff and the Planning Commission, we can't go to the minimum, but we use that desire for the maximum to drive the better design. You know, the whole crux of it is could we have better design automatically by standards? Yes, we don't have that, so we use the CUP to do that.
So go ahead.
Is there any, one of the issues on Hafoka was the wetlands portion of the property. Now, it's adjacent to this, but I see nothing here that deals with wetlands.
I'm not aware of this particular property under that easement that was similar to the Hafoka property, but I can't say for sure because that's part of the development process. They'll submit their title report and we'll find out, but I'm not by corporate knowledge aware of that on this property.
So Corey, I have a question to try and answer Tammy's question about what's changed since 1998. We have our zoning, which, as you said, allows 4, but they can go with an 8 conditional use. Back in 1998, as a city, we had way more control over conditional use that the state has now changed, where used to be with conditional use, we could just kind of say, well, you're only going to get 6, or you're only going to get 5, and give our reasons. And now we can't. We have to give reasons, and if they can mitigate that, we have to give 8.
Yeah.
So that's a difference between now
Well,
and when they were
I would
built.
politely push back onto that a little bit. I've been a planner since 1993. I can't comment on how planning and planning commission work because I didn't come here till 2004. But conditional uses were always allowed.
Right.
So since 1993 of employment, conditional uses were always allowed.
But didn't
what
you
what
tell
you
me-
did see is cities interpret those as no's until we're comfortable. And that's where the state came back in and said, quit interpreting it that way. But the reality of it is CUPs never had a layer of denial. They were always allowed.
But they
It's
used
just
to
that
do
it was
more of it.
misused by municipalities, so the legislature stepped in. Whether Centerville misused it back in 1998, I don't know. But
Well, that's my concern is I think Shayla Park is only 5 or 5.5 units.
it's 6 something.
It's 6 something. I think 8 is just too many for the piece of property. I think we found that out with Brighton Homes. And I think if you put too many in one area, 20, 30 years from now, you have all of our, and like you said, we have no control. We need to be comfortable if we vote for this, is what I understand you've tried to teach me. You have to be comfortable with 8, and you have to be comfortable with apartments or condos, because once you say yes, it can be anything. And that's actually what happened with the Brighton Homes. The reason it was zoned residential medium was they had been told it was going to be a assisted living.
No, I'll push back on that again. I know that there's a public perception, but I'll just go to the nuts and bolts of the approval. The nuts and the bolts of the approval was residential medium. They did come in with assisted living because that's what they were taught, but you did not pass it based on assisted living because you did not review it from assisted living standpoint. The assisted living came after the fact, and it came, yes, they were thinking that. They said, yes, we're going to think to do that. Well, where the public perception was really taken is that they came in with an assisted living and they got approval for a CUP with assisted living. The deal with the finances fell apart, but it was zoned residential medium with all the uses. Staff warned, the planning commission warned, there may have been public perception
And
that,
council perception.
yeah, and then it was added to when the CUP came in and actually got approved. But the bait and switch, I will always differ with everybody. You may have perceived one, I don't want to take away your perception, but it was known and told the residential medium, and they said, if this doesn't work through, they planned on multifamily units, they hoped that the assisted living would come through.
And I guess that's why I feel the way I do on this is I'd like to work with them, be able to negotiate, but that's not a possibility. And so we've either got to be comfortable with 8 or say no at this point in time.
Yeah, and I think you
8
have
is
that
too-
discretion.
I think 8 is too many for that area right now.
Yeah, you do have that discretion.
So Corey, since you're still being grilled, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
If this were to go residential medium, what happens to the 2 properties that, from your perspective as a community development director, the 2 homes that Tammy has presented photos of, what would happen to them?
They would likely remain in the same condition. The issue will be whether the owner is going to look at the AL for the one home and the residential medium for the other home. I happen to know that there's some problems with the west home because the owner on contract has taken a part of that property and absorbed it into commercial without approval from the city. And so I don't know what the plans are for the future of that home that's residential medium now. But that was likely stay. That's a fairly in good shape, intact home. And so it'll probably stay, and single family is an allowed use through a CUP in a residential medium. The AL to the east, the home you saw across the street, that is not quite in the same condition. I know that they have talked about remodeling it in the past. It's AL. It would stay AL. I don't remember the size of that lot, so I don't know if it's non-conforming already from the size of the lot. But my bets is if you rezone the property behind, you will likely see that property out front somehow figure out a best way to change because it will probably add value to that property to drive some type of
Yeah.
change or investment in a remodel.
Just a note, Corey, in rereading these minutes from 1997 and 1998, I actually did read when Dave Bell approached the council about switching part of his agricultural property to commercial, and the vote was yes. So,
That was the other piece. This is
Okay.
the home now.
okay.
The home was residential medium with a large backyard.
Okay. So just very couple last thoughts based on what Robin has said. Robin, you've said that you're uncomfortable with 8. You live in a residential medium neighborhood yourself.
Yes,
and your
but I would like to see it changed.
Good. So the past council also wanted to see that changed after listening to citizens' input.
That's why I feel like we need to have more options in our zoning. And so I would like to, that's not to be talked about right now, but at some point, we need more options to.
But again, my greatest concern is
Let's
consistency.
focus on the issue before us. I don't think either of you are going to change your minds. We have
I was looking for a commitment. I was looking for a commitment to those in this council who feel uncomfortable with residential medium that we can change that inconsistency in the Southeast General Plan as well, in the actual ordinance.
Are we ready for a motion, or are you going to table it? What do you want to do?
I'll move that we approve the request for this piece of property to switch from agricultural low to residential medium. And that is respecting the history of Centerville. A very interesting exercise is to read back in past city council meeting minutes. And it's just over and over and over again. This used to just be an agricultural community, and every request is switching from agriculture to something, agriculture to something, agriculture to something, agriculture to something. And I just don't know where we can draw the line and stop saying yes and just have to keep everything that's left agricultural.
So we have a motion to approve ordinance 2017-18 as written, changing from agricultural low to residential medium. Is there a second? Hearing none, I'll rule that fails for lack of a second. Is there another motion?
Yes, I would move that I was fairly silent, but I would move that we reject the zoning map amendment on 640 West Porter Lane because ordinance 2017-18. I am uncomfortable with the rejection, but I am uncomfortable with the proposal as it sits. I'm concerned. I recognize what Tammy is saying. That property is a white elephant to a degree, but I am uncomfortable with 8 per acre, and therefore we've got to figure out something that makes more sense. So I would make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
And are there any findings besides I'm uncomfortable?
If I could help you with some of those, just based upon your discussion.
I would, okay, I would love some supplement.
I'd like to preface this with staff is recommending approval, but if you're inclined to deny it, based upon your discussion and our ordinances, some suggested findings would be parceling out the legitimate reasons that have been discussed.
I would indicate you don't think there are many. Just, sorry.
No, that there
Just the
were
look on your face.
There were some that were not legitimate, so I want to carve those out. Due to the impact on the overall character of the existing development in the vicinity, so you are looking at other areas. Due to the fact that the general plan allows for both RM or RL in this area, so there's still available use of land at a lower density.
Or commercial. There's no reason not to allow commercial there.
I think the plan's only RL, RM in that area, isn't it?
That
Yeah, that's right.
You've got a commercial across the street. There's no, the general plan says no more commercial?
This is the buffer area. Number 3, concerns with the drainage as
The adequacy
discussed.
of the facilities?
Well, I just want to say the drainage as discussed. And number 4, based upon the testimony and written public comment received.
So I assume you would
And
like to add
you're
those
welcome to
findings.
add to those as you see fit.
The only one that I would add to those is the issues with regard to, even though it would be in compliance with fire code, that there are substantial concerns about fire and emergency services protection in that particular instance.
And again, I don't think that's a valid, I mean, it's the same thing with the schools, but you can certainly add an additional condition if you'd like.
I'd prefer to add that.
Okay, so
You're indicating that would fail a reasonably debatable standard?
in my opinion, yes.
Okay.
And to the finding about RM versus RL, I just want to make clear my position that if it were appropriate in this area, I would love to say yes to RL. But again, just considering this specific piece of property, and I don't think RL could even fit and work, that's why I lean towards allowing.
I recognize what you're saying, but I don't think RM works either.
Because ultimately, like I asked on those 2 properties, if this went RM, you strand some properties in a really weird situation. So it's a really tough one. But
Unfortunately, that stranding, in my opinion, was done on the prior property approval.
most likely, yes, but it just exacerbates that problem.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before we vote?
Just a clarification, so that adds condition number 5, concerns with the adequacy of the fire protection?
Or finding.
Finding.
Thank you.
No further discussion. Let's, if you're voting in favor of this, you're voting for denial. Let's start the voting with Robin.
So yes, denial.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes 4-1, so that zoning change is denied. Thank you for your efforts on this, and staff for your work on this, and our citizens for participation. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a public hearing, another one, or I guess our first one, that one was not a public hearing, on the a zoning code amendment to around construction, sales, and service limited, definition and use table. The essential impact of this, as we'll hear from staff, is to allow use of, or a construction company to take over existing buildings on Main Street, or in theory, I guess that would also allow additional new use on Main Street. So first, Corey, I assume you were prepared to give us a staff report on this before we have a public hearing.
Just for clarification, the point of being grilled, me red in the face, has nothing to do with the motion.
I thought it was the lack of hair. You're getting too much sun.
That's
now.
what I'm most embarrassed about. So, the request before you is done by this council. You asked the Planning Commission to go back and staff to look at the construction, sales, and services use on Main Street. That ended up to be a couple of meetings long with the Planning Commission. There was some healthy debate, I think, about it. As I recall, the construction, sales, and service is a fairly broad category, as pointed out in the first meeting with the Planning Commission, and recognition that we've had construction, sales, and services on the past, but it also involves storage yards and some other matters that are associated with that fairly broad category. In the debate, the commission was a little uncomfortable with going with the definition as is because staff raised some issues about outdoor storage, the Main Street corridor plan, the restrictions of storage, which implicates it has to be away 50 feet away from residential, which pushes that outdoor storage towards the center or the front of the lot. The idea of the Main Street corridor overlay zone is to have the buildings and the parking, and so the push to the storage back on the back side of the lots towards the residential was undesirable, and so the commission wanted to address the use of outdoor storage. So two matters, at minimum, they wanted to go back to is one, let's create a construction sales and service limited type. We use limited in a number of things. We have warehousing, which is a big category, and then warehousing limited. We have vehicle repair limited. We have vehicle repair. We have printing, and then we have printing limited. So it was very easy to go back in and say, okay, we can use construction sales and service type uses that we envision. That's the plumbing and an electrician, some tradesmen, having an opportunity to serve the community on Main Street, but without the storage yards. So that's what the commission wanted to do, is create a limited category and take away the storage. And that became a little bit dicey to figure out, because outdoor storage is addressed broad through all the commercial zones. You're 50 feet away from residential, then you can, as per your site plan, locate your outdoor storage. So what they decided, or staff decided, is to leave that in place for all commercial zones except for the CM, South Main Street corridor, which right now that's the only place we use the CM. The CM can be used in other areas of the city, but it's currently only used within the South Main Street corridor. So the change of the outdoor storage just simply says, hey, for the South Main Street corridor CM, outdoor storage is prohibited except for a temporary use. So a temporary use that has, fireworks, Christmas tree sales, the produce sales, does allow for a short period of outdoor storage associated with that temporary use. So that's what the commission did. They created a new category. So it's a limited construction sales and service. They added a prohibition on the South Main Street corridor for outdoor storage, except for when temporary uses are approved. And then they have a third change. You've got to add that whole entire new use into the use list of the zone. So they added as a permitted use, starting with the CM, and that's what's fairly typical is once you start a category, it's prohibited till you hit a category, and then usually it moves through the categories all the way up into the end of intensity, unless it's some type of use like we wouldn't want big box stores to be located in an industrial zone, so we'll pull them out when you move the industrial. But construction, sales, and service is consistent with what you have in your industrial west side. So basically, there's a new use table. It's not permitted all the way to the CM zone. The CM, it becomes permitted, and then it runs permitted all the way through the industrial use categories. So that's a recommendation to you, those three.
Questions for staff on this?
Corey, do you feel like we need to be more specific about what's not allowed? Was that fully discussed at the Planning Commission level?
No, it wasn't discussed at all, because typically we just go with the pattern of your definitions. You have a general description of what it is, and then you say typical uses such as but not limited to X. And what we tried to do is at least put in that you're not doing your outdoor storage and large equipment storage outside.
What about types of trucks, types of traffic coming in and out, size of?
That gets more problematic, because you're dealing with a use list, and it's really difficult to say, well, this CM zone prohibited, that CM zone allowed, that CM over there allowed.
But that's the point of the limited definition, right? That is my opinion. I mean,
no, because I can see where you can be in the industrial area and you could now do your equipment very easily versus something on Main Street.
Right. So wouldn't we only apply this contractor sales and service limited?
That's where you go to the outdoor storage. You're just prohibited. It's indoor, or take your equipment somewhere else.
Right. So that's the only change, really, is prohibiting outdoor storage.
Correct.
And so if they build,
well, not only change, but only change for this corridor.
Right.
It just basically says in this corridor you will not do outdoor storage, and that's going to apply to everything across the board, because it's in the special regulations.
What are we defining in that term as outdoor storage? What is that? Does that mean
Anything
extra
outside
cars,
of-
extra vehicles?
Well, if you look at the original discussion of the CM zone, everything is to be done indoors. So when you first go to the CM zone description, everything is indoors under that description, not even in the use list. Just the description of commercial medium is it's capped at 10,000, everything's done indoors, except for is allowed by this title. And then you have to kick over to the special regulations of that zone, and that's where you see CM, if we applied it somewhere else in Main Street corridor, still the 50-foot from residential. But in the case of this clause that's being added, it's saying prohibited on Main Street, period. So
Yeah.
it's automatic indoors, and it's reiterated by no outdoor storage even during the site plan process.
So it still could be, say, for an example, a lumber yard, and they just could keep all of the lumber indoors.
Correct. Well, I
but-
think we take that out. Read the definition again, I'm forgetting. We tried to narrow it so that it wasn't trying to encompass lumber yards and so forth.
It does
An
say
establishment
small materials and supplies.
Okay.
Um,
So if it's specifying, I'm asking for staff's opinion, if it's specifying various small materials, supplies, and services, then in my opinion, that limits the need for huge flatbed trucks carrying long pieces of lumber and things like
Right.
that.
The idea is you're capped at 10,000 square feet. That 10,000 square feet is going to run you only so much
Right,
space.
okay. So what power does this ordinance as it's written give to staff if we run into someone kind of trying to push that boundary of that definition of
Same
small?
power that anybody who pushes a boundary in any category, code
So-
enforcement.
So let me ask Lisa a question. So you said small materials. Let me just throw out an example. So somebody is a fidget spinner dealer, and they decide to park 3 pallets outside of small materials. They're individually small. How do you quantify that you're now into the outdoor storage?
It's not outside, it'll be indoors. There is no outdoor storage for this category is not allowed.
Right, so I would be more worried about the size of truck regularly delivering the pallets is what kind of
Sure.
my question, yeah. But that could happen with any retail establishment as well, I
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get a like a Cisco truck pulling up to offload,
Right.
soda lids. You do have some impact from a business
Yeah.
that has any kind of volume.
And just to note, our Main Street corridor actually prohibits semi-trucks, correct?
I don't know our truck route regulations.
I
Somebody
believe
queried
so.
me, and I said, I believe that we do have a truck route definition, and I thought Main Street corridor was part of that truck route.
We have some
Thank you.
restriction on unloading vehicles, right? Loading and unloading vehicles.
Only for one use.
Okay. So do you feel that this gives flexibility but also protection enough that we can still have a quality Main Street area protecting the
My
neighborhood?
recommendation will still be, we don't do this.
Don't do it. Well, I'm torn on this one. Any other thoughts from the council?
Well, we haven't heard the public hearing, but just to be clear, why I initiated this is that we need a new fire station. We've made plans for that as a South Davis Metro Fire District or Fire Service area, and the intent was what is the best use for the current fire station, and if we build a new one. And that's how this came up, that it was a recommended use either as an auto garage or construction type construction office where you could store some materials indoors. So I'd recommend before the council make decisions that we hear, hold the public hearing and then have further discussion.
And just a comment on our truck route ordinance. In Title 14, our designated truck routes include number 1 listed as Main Street from South City boundary to the North City boundary. So it is a truck route.
Excuse me, I apologize for my voice this evening. So if there are no objections, I'd like to go ahead and open the public hearing and invite anyone who would like to share their opinion on whether construction use is limited, is an appropriate, construction sales and services limited is an appropriate use for Main Street. and then after that, we'll turn it to the council for more discussion. Anyone who would like to speak on this?
Is this working?
We fixed it just for you.
Okay. I just want to...
And your name, Lee.
Lee Scablin, Centerville, Utah. I just want to state that as I've listened to this, it sounds like we're trying to change something to benefit the fire district, rather than looking at what we really want on Main Street. Now, I look at the fire station, it's very suitable to a lube center or to a mechanic garage, lots of different things. Let the market carry it. Let's not, I don't want to say that word, but let's not twist it to force it towards something that we want it to be for a special favor, because there might be someone out here that wants a special favor later and they're going to expect that. That's my only perception. That's my comment.
Thanks, Lee. Anybody else who's willing to speak or would like to speak on this?
My name's Kyle Shoup. We are with Shoup Electric. Well, I am. So with the proposed property, we are the clients. We are the proposed buyer of the property for the fire station. So with that being said, we look at this property, and it's a unique property, as you mentioned, as this gentleman mentioned. There's, it could turn into, a service repair shop, things like that, which in my opinion isn't the best looking thing, with cars going in and out through that front entrance right onto Main Street all the time. Our proposed, our overall scheme is to keep that the frontage looking really good, clean, not a lot of traffic going through there. All of our vehicles, all of our service vehicles, most of our guys take theirs home. We have like 2 service vehicles that stay in the lot. So probably even minimal of what the fire station sees now as far as a clutter concern. All of our materials do get stocked indoors to be able to keep everything safe. That's just the way that we do things. So none of our equipment gets stored outside of all of our materials. So it always gets stocked inside. Deliveries are all done really in a box truck. So, big semis and stuff coming daily are not a concern for us. It just doesn't happen because most of our materials are all small materials. With that being said, we've been in the community for 30 plus years. My father started the business, and it was our intention that we wanted to keep the business here in Centerville as we look to grow, the business through brothers and everything else with my father. We thought it'd be a great location. It's a unique property, as we mentioned, but we think we can make it work really well, give the building a facelift, and be able to, spruce it up a little bit and enjoy that presence on Main Street for us. It's an advantage to have, our name there, but also to not make it something as busy as needs be. We're out before the children go to school, so that's not an issue of, running trucks in and out while kids are going to school, and usually we're back at, 4 o'clock in the afternoon as well, give or take. And so we just thought it would be a great, unique opportunity for us to purchase this building and be able to keep our presence here in Centerville.
We'd love to keep your business here. At least I would.
So
Maybe not everyone.
Can I ask him a question?
Sure. I think that's fine.
So this limited use, you're good with this?
Yes, it works for us. We have other like small skid steers and mini excavation equipment that we actually keep on a different site that we own down in West Bountiful. So as far as materials are concerned, and again, it's just the way that our industry is with all the copper that's in all our materials and other things like that, it doesn't make sense for us to store anything outside. And so everything is stored inside in the warehouse. All you'll see outside is vehicles.
And does the building need to be increased in size for you?
As it stands now, no. I know that the use of the property states that you've got a percentage that you can add on to the building before we have to conform with the new overlay, the map overlay, and it's never our intention to probably grow it to that point where we'd have to do the mess with the overlay per se at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lisa, in your opinion, would it be appropriate to hear from the fire chief or not in terms of the fire service area's needs?
Well, this is a public comment period. Anyone's welcome to speak to it.
Okay.
Hi, Lisa. Great. Members of council, thank you for hearing this tonight.
And your name, Jeff?
Jeff Bassett, Fire Chief of South Davis Metro Fire, Centerville resident. Obviously for us, this is, we would hope for some support on this. As I've looked over what staff has presented and actually looked over what was presented in the Planning Commission, Planning Commission gave this to you in a 7-0 vote, favorable. Just the two things that really draw attention to me is, A, that there's already a business like what the Shoops are trying to do already on Main Street. In my view, I don't see those as businesses that deter our Main Street. I don't see those businesses causing a lot of problems for our Main Street. And from what Mr. Shoop has said, that what their intent is to do is to be exactly the same or less than what those businesses that already occur on Main Street are doing. And then I would just I was looking at G where it says Planning Commission finds that opportunities to encourage restoration or revitalization ought to be permissible. And I think what we're looking at is that our Main Street hasn't had much activity for a lot of years. And if we can get a good business owner, someone that is in our community for a long time, I think that's worth giving them a shot. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak? If not, I'll close the public hearing and turn it to the council for discussion.
I want to absolutely agree with the comments that Lee made. And this is what I'm absolutely committed to in this position, is to not ever make a decision based on one applicant, but like I just said in the earlier issue, to apply principles consistently. One of the concerns that I have is our tendency as of late as a city to just say no to almost everything. And so to the chief's point, to Lee's point, some of the other possible uses that you stated are actually not allowed also in our commercial medium. And so it is a pretty narrow window of things that could happen here. And again, just like I said in the other issue, I lean towards, rather than the specific uses being the problem, it's the lack of activity and positive occupation of these properties that is more the problem that I'm concerned about. And so that's the thing that leads me more towards allowing this change, is that with the limited use definition versus the other, I feel that we're just respecting property owners and the market to speak as to what can happen, and we're not saying no to everything. If we say no to townhomes on Main Street, if we say no to contractor sales on Main Street, then we're maybe just waiting for something that's never going to happen, and we're encouraging blight in our dear city, which hurts all of us and all of our property values. So, but I agree with you, Lee, and I would never make a decision based on one specific applicant, absolutely.
Any other comments before I call for a motion?
I would like to, I'm disappointed in the public hearing. I would like to propose that it be continued till the next council meeting. I'd like the opportunity, having heard Corey's presentation, to circulate and talk to a few more people. I think 2 respondents is one pro, one con, is inadequate for this decision. So I would propose that we postpone this for 2 weeks.
Okay. I would note that, you know, we tried to be, at least I've tried to be open with this, sharing our plans. We've got a picture of the new fire station. We held an open house as part of the proposed tax increase for the fire service area, with this being one of the main purposes of that. So I've had some feedback outside of this meeting. Generally, the feedback that I receive is, yes, we need to improve the capacity and the capability and the facilities of our fire and emergency services. And if this is one of the things we need to do to do that, then most people seem willing to support it. But I don't believe that extending this another 2 weeks would make a huge difference.
And I don't believe it's the council's responsibility to pull teeth to get people to be here. I mean, we should absolutely make sure people know.
Now, wait a minute.
That
We've got another item on the agenda that you voted that you said the other thing. Just saying.
What?
We tried to talk about something last time, and you said, oh, no, we need another time to have a public hearing.
Right, so that we could hold a public hearing. You guys had
We
said
had
you
a
didn't
public
want a
hearing.
public hearing.
No, we haven't had a public.
We
We've
have
not had a. This is the first public hearing on.
Comment on that twice.
No, we haven't.
Okay.
Not on this.
So
Sorry,
the issue
other
before
issue.
us is the public hearing zoning code amendment on construction sales services. Is that a motion to?
I would make a
table
motion
for-
that we continue the public hearing for a 2-week period till the 15th, to give some additional opportunity, because I just don't think we've had enough input. I'm leaning towards changing my mind from what I thought, but I'd just like to hear from some other citizens.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We continue the public hearing for another 2 weeks to continue to receive comment on this. Further discussion?
I'm waiting for Lisa. She's grabbing her mic.
Oh, yeah, I was just trying to make sure that the public comment that you're receiving is part of the record. So that is one way to solve it, so that we will accept written comment and also continue the public hearing till the next meeting, and that way the public comment will be part of the record.
Which we've been receiving it via email and other things for some time.
Corey, I have a couple of questions for you. I just like to see your shiny face.
Shiny tonight.
So one of my questions is, I mean, I think Ship Electric would be great there, but like you said, we're zoning the whole corridor, not just for that. So he's telling us that he won't have that many things there, trucks there. But if we open this up, can someone else move up here that would have a lot of delivery trucks or a lot of work trucks coming and going? You know, could we have a landscaper that would move in that would have, 50 trucks leaving every day to go out and do yard work and things like that?
In addition to Cook and Tingy, who are also already on Main Street.
Correct.
I am going to answer that by dodging it. And here's how the best way I'm going to dodge that question. I recommended no, and I still recommend no to this change. I don't want to get involved in the politics, because I know way too much of what's going on and what's expected. And the city's trying to do a lot of different things, and the fire district is trying to do a lot of different things. And we're trying to develop Main Street, and we're doing it in a place that's difficult. So this is a difficult decision. The reason I hang on to the no, and I've received calls saying, Corey, why don't you bring up what you know from the past? And it's because I'm trying to sit and say, make this decision based on the merits. What I know during the process when I arrived here is that there were uses on Main Street that are undesirable. I was asked during that period of time under that leadership when I arrived to start shooting towards a goal to change Main Street. So part of that plan was to reach out to a consultant process. And in 2007, we reached out to a consultant process. We hired somebody for $30,000, good or bad, you can debate. And we went through, and one of the items that was asked during that time is go through the list and eliminate problems that have some conflicts. Now, driven out of that was auto body work, auto repair work during that time period was a huge driver. 2003, there was a pare down. During the Main Street plan, we went through and pared away a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. But we reestablished new parameters, and we used a form-based code. Now, I understand that form-based code worries less about certain uses and more about the form of the Main Street plan. So my bias in your recommendation is stemming all away from that period of time. So until the South Main Street corridor plan goes away, I am still sticking to the principles, even though that at times I have screamed and yelled and stomped my feet that you're watering this down with the densities and the reinvestment. We're now back to, because we have changed that and the synergy is tough, we're now going back and trying to bring back uses that were taken away. I'm not saying that's a bad decision, but while we're still hanging some appeal on the South Main Street plan, this interrupts that ability. And future development being planned is going to interrupt that ability for that South Main Street plan. So we'll be back here again over the South Main Street plan. And that's where I'm saying is if I have to be the defender of the existing policy until it goes away. The South Main Street corridor plan was eliminating use impacts, coming to a form-based. When you bring back lumber yards, construction sales and services, trucks to that corridor, that's not what you're accomplishing by the South Main Street corridor. Now, it could be argued just as legit. Well, we've made a mistake. We put this South Main Street, it's too narrow, it's not broad enough, it's not accommodating the current economics in the marketplace. And I think that's debatable. But to me, we're doing the South Main Street plan and changing it one line item at a time. And I think until that's gone away, my answer will be you should not pass this.
So normally, Robin, whenever Corey makes a recommendation, this council is pretty happy to vote against him. So I thought if Corey recommended against this, I'd have you in the bag.
Well, he did such a good job of dodging, I almost forgot the original question that Robin had. I think, Tammy, and Paul, to your point about will 2 weeks change this significantly, the dilemma that we face as a council is this town is getting close to full on everything. There's not a lot of available space left. And decisions we make ripple.
They do.
They're going to ripple for a long time. So does 2 weeks necessarily change the perspective of a potential buyer in the fire station? I would hope not. I mean, it's a pretty good land price. But if it gets Bill one way or another, as far as his comfort zone, I'm in support of that. I mean, it just seems that if we snap to it and make a decision tonight with some fence sitting, I would be concerned in the future we really regret the decision one way or the other.
I would like to say I'm totally fine with that too, because I started this out by saying I'm torn on this issue, and I absolutely am. Because I agree with everything that Corey just said, and I think the best thing for Centerville is to protect the South Main Street corridor plan. But the frustrating thing is that the reality of this council is that they're stripping it away and they're saying no. And so I'm not sure how to just keep saying no and hurt Centerville in that way. But I could be convinced either way.
We've got a bigger
still.
picture of how do we provide adequate emergency and fire service in our community when the places to build or develop the right facility are limited. And so
am I misinformed? I thought that the other deal was a done deal and this was independent of that.
I thought so. I thought so too.
Apparently that's not the case.
It is independent, but obviously the South Davis Metro Fire would like to use the proceeds from selling the existing fire station.
So from the time frame, it may affect
From
it.
the time frame, it's...
And again, just like I said back when we were trying to decide whether or not to switch the Hofoka property to residential medium, we should try really hard not to consider that and just look at, do we want to allow this use for the long term?
Valid points. So we have a motion on the table to table for 2 weeks. Let's do a roll call vote. Bill?
Aye.
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 That's unanimous. We'll discuss it again in 2 weeks. Okay, many of you have been very patient for waiting for item number 4 on our agenda, which is a public hearing on Founders Park proposed name change to the William R. Smith Park. We appreciate your patience on that. In terms of a staff report on the name change, Steve, you collected a significant amount of information on the history of this issue and included it in the packet. It was a lot of research. You want to provide us a summary?
Well, the summary is showing on the screen. Do you want me to just kind of read through that for the benefit of the audience? Mayor?
I think it would be useful for the council, I'm sure, has read it, but I think it's useful for the audience to kind of go through the history and some of the information that's been collected, what could be found and what could not be found.
Okay. And we attached quite a few documents in one big collection of documents. You have to scan through continuously to see those things. But we did not attach everything that was in the files, but those documents that we thought were fairly representative of what had happened over the years. These bullets represent the summary of that. In 1934, David F. Smith, son of William R. Smith, and his wife conveyed to Davis County 1.45 acres that is now the north portion of Founders Park. Letters from descendants indicate he donated this land. There does not appear to be a reverter clause in the 1934 Smith deed conveying the property to the county. That has been represented in the past by some. Lisa has researched that. You see the attached deed and 2004 confidential memorandum regarding this matter. That was a memo from our city attorney back in 2004. In 1953, Davis County leased the 1.45 acre parcel to Centerville City for 50 years to be used as a public park. The lease was amended in 1987 to extend the lease to 2037, in other words, a new 50-year period, and to allow public buildings to be constructed on it or for any public purpose that the city, may deem advisable. I'm assuming that, considering the time frame of that amendment, that they were probably looking at it as a possible site for the new city hall. I'm just assuming that. I don't know if that's correct. The amended lease agreement does provide that in the event the city at any time ceases to use the property for public purposes, the county shall have the right to enter into immediate possession of the property, and all rights of the lease shall be terminated. In 1954, Marlowe Fisher and his wife sold 1.14 acres to Centerville City immediately south of the parcel mentioned above. This became part of what is now known as Founders Park. Now I say sold because there is evidence in the records that a sum of money was paid to the Fishers for that parcel. Wasn't a whole lot of money in today's terms, but back then it may have been, I don't know. Council minutes in 1969 indicate the park was given the name of the William R. Smith Park following a public hearing. There's not a lot of detail in the records on that public hearing, just a paragraph in the minutes, pretty simple summary. No comments recorded as we do today, with each individual who spoke being recorded, the essence of what they say being in the minutes. The minutes, 1969 minutes, just have a paragraph referring to the public hearing and then the council's action. In 1989, this was 20 years later, the city council conducted a contest to name 3 parks, including this one on Main Street, the park that became known as Smoot Park, and the Ballfield Park being constructed on North 400 West, or what we know as Community Park today. The file contains several letters from Smith descendants saying the park had already been named after William R. Smith and asking the council to retain that name. Despite this, the council selected the name of Founders Park. which had been submitted by one of the Smith descendants. Her letter is among the attached documents. In 1995, an attorney sent a letter included in the attached documents stating he had been retained by some Smith descendants to convince the council to change the name back to William R. Smith. After several months, the city attorney responded and said the council had decided to retain the name of Founders Park. This decision was made in a closed meeting on October 3, 1995. The minutes of this closed meeting are attached as a confidential document for the city council because minutes of closed meetings are not to be made available to the public. Let's see, where am I? That's it. Okay, there you go. That's the summary.
And maybe I would add that in the last 14 years that I've been associated with the city, this topic has comes up every few years. Mr. Sessions is always kind to remind us of this and bring this up. We've discussed a number of other options to put a plaque, to rename the main pavilion, the William R. Smith Pavilion, and put a plaque telling the story. There's been we heard some great suggestions on ideas to commemorate founders from Shauna Essig. And the council then decided, let's open this up and hear from the public. We've received a number of comments via email, electronically over the past couple of weeks on this. And a lot of people feel very strongly about the park and about their ancestors. And it's a very difficult and emotional decision when you're talking about the naming of something that's very important to people, whether it's they played at the park as a child or their ancestor donated the land. And so I guess as I open the public hearing, I'll ask for respectful dialogue and be considerate of somebody else's feelings, whether you're on one side or the other of this issue. And I think there's a general, I think the council wishes we could find a good way to recognize all the founders of Centerville and those who made significant contributions to our community, as well as honor the legacy of the Smith family and the significant contribution that they made as part of this.
Before you open up, I have one question for Steve. Just in bridging between 1934 and 1953, I did not really see a lot of evidence that says from 1934 to 1953 the county used this as a park. The assumption is that's implied based on information we received in terms of we have the drawing that says Smith Park on it and things we've seen in past councils.
I don't know.
Or did it, well, I know it's way before any of our time, but did it become active as a park in 1953? Because you have a conveyance that has no stated use, and then the first instance, at least from this timeline, that it's stated use as a park is 1953.
We might have some people here who might know the answer to that.
That's why I'm asking Steve, and then we might get some additional
I can't
answer
answer the question. There was, as I recall in the files, there was reference to the improvement of the property and that the JC's or Junior Chamber of Commerce, whatever they were called at the time, was involved in helping make the improvements to the park. But I don't recall what year that was in the records.
Thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions for staff before we open the public hearing? If not, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing and invite any who would like to speak about the proposed name change from the Founders Park back to the William R. Smith Park. We'll invite you to come to the microphone and share your comments with us.
Well, I'm a native of I'm Carolyn Smith Stevens. I'm the granddaughter of David Smith, and I am a native and a former resident of Centerville, Utah. My two sons were raised here, and one of my sons, who is in Washington, D.C., wrote his thoughts, and he said that he remembers he grew up with the park in his backyard, and he was proud of his heritage in the Smith family. He heard stories of William and his role in the establishment of Centerville. He was a true pioneer and contributed much of his life and resources to Centerville City. Because of his commitment to Centerville, his role in the establishment of the city, and his spirit to make Centerville a great place to live and work, I lend my support to a name change to a great park in Centerville, from Founders Park to William Reed Smith Park. This change would represent a commitment by the Centerville city leadership to the heritage and sacrifices of our forefathers. And I know that I was told all the time I was growing up that was to be the William Reed Smith Park. I was a JC who helped in the development of that park. And I lived right on Parish Lane, next door to the park. And I would really recommend that, in honor of my grandfather and my great-grandfather, that this park's name be changed back to the William R. Smith Memorial Park.
Thank you.
My name is Holly Ince. I live at 1148 North, 300 South. I'm sorry, 300 East. I am in favor of changing the name of Founders Park to William R. Smith Park. I find it hard to believe that after family members gave the land, supplies, and services to develop the park, it could have been changed and not to honor their ancestors who was the founder in Centerville. I encourage the approach of changing the park's name to William R. Smith and then putting in plaques recognizing other particular founders like the Parishes, the Roundies, the Roberts, the Porters, the Grovers, and others. Most people do not know who the founders and leaders and the citizens were or their histories. Our park that just says Founders Park tells us nothing about our founders. Recognizing the specific founders would be more effective with plaques recognizing them. If we have a name, we might encourage them to learn more in their history. William R. Smith's family gave the property. If we are not going to honor their ancestors as with their intention, maybe we should give the property back. No one wants to do this. We really don't want to do this, but I think we have an obligation to honor this man, this family, for the time and the money that they put into this. Thank you.
I broke it.
Uh-oh. You bought that.
Oh. My name is Lowell Dean Smith, Jr. My father was raised on the corner just to the north of here, and he is a son of David Felshaw Smith, and so I'm a grandson of David Felshaw Smith. My wife is also a descendant of William R. Smith through one of his other wives. I don't know if you are aware from reading the plaque over there, which is a lovely plaque, by the way. I think it's great. It's got names of a lot of different founders on it, and I'm very much in favor of that plaque, although I would like to see one thing changed. David F. Smith's mother is not on the plaque. The other three wives of William R. Smith are on the plaque, but not David, and David's the one that gave the property. So that would be nice, but I'm also in favor of changing it to the William R. Smith Park simply because of my heritage, I guess. But not only that, William R. Smith had an enormous impact on Davis County and on Centerville in particular. He was the second bishop, not the first, but he was the second bishop here in Centerville. Subsequently became the first stake president of the church here in Davis County. He was the probate judge, which means he was the ultimate law enforcement officer here in Davis County as well. He served on the territorial legislature representing this area. But I'd like to tell you just a little bit about my grandfather, David F. Smith. David F. Smith was also very committed to Centerville. Lived here, raised his family here, endured the, I guess, the 1933 flood, which came down and I think destroyed most of his chickens, about 600 chickens. And my father got to clean up the mess. So he was willing to tell us all about that. My cousin Carolyn lived right there at the back of the park. Next door to her was her father, Wayne Smith, who was here his entire life. But David F. Smith was my grandfather. Lived here until he was named the state's Secretary of Agriculture and moved to Salt Lake, where he was a little bit closer. But he represented Centerville in the state legislature. He was a school teacher. In 1905, he had a class of 48 students from here. They were in the 7th and 8th grade, and kept track of them for their entire lives. I know that because this is probably the first history that was written of Centerville by my grandfather. And he was very proud of this city. But I think his intent was to honor his father, William R. Smith, when he gave the property to the city. I guess through the county. Now that's a new information that I didn't have, is that he actually gave it to the county and the county leased it to the city. Wasn't aware of that.
They still own it.
But so that's an interesting addition to my knowledge of the whole situation. I'm grateful for what they did. I'm grateful for Centerville City and what they did for our family. And I hope that you understand that we do get emotional about it. There are a lot of descendants of William R. Smith. He had 4 wives and 31 children. So there are a lot of descendants that are still here, and there are a lot of us who are not. I live in Kaysville, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. Actually, it's not Kaysville. It's in Mutton Hollow Township, but that's a different story. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
My name's Marilyn Beckman. I'm not a Smith, but I'm somehow distantly, forevermore, probably related to them some way. I've given my spiel on the idea that we ought to honor agreements that have been made. However, the other day I was in New York and ran into Shauna Essig. And Shauna said, Marilyn, will you please go back to the city council, because she's not going to be here tonight. And I won't tell you my whole story again, but I will tell you what Shauna said. And Shauna said, please remind them that they could name the park the Smith Family Park. And as Mrs. Entz has said, they could put plaques up honoring the founding families, the founding fathers of Centerville, if you will, and that way we are accomplishing the best of both. So that is a message to you from Shauna in New York. I wholly support that and hope that you can consider that as you discuss tonight.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Hi there. My name is Grant Chavez. I married into a Smith family. Just wanted you to know, so did the person who attached the letter married into the Smith family. And the other thing is, with spell check nowadays, you put in founder, you might end up with flounder. You put in this guy's name, the kids today, and Google it, you're going to find out the history of the place. That's about it.
Thank you.
My name is Becky Neville. I was a Smith. That's Grant, my husband. I just wanted to say that I'm a Smith. I grew up here in Centerville. I live here again. It's been a lot, my family was here.
Could you lower the mic just a little bit? We can't hear you over here.
That's all right. I'd rather not be heard, but anyway, so I feel strongly, and I remember when they changed the name of Smith Park to Founders Park, and I remember my family and myself being somewhat offended, feeling like somehow we'd been slighted, like we didn't matter anymore, and new people that had moved in here were maybe more important than we were, and like our history didn't matter. And so I felt kind of bad about it, because we'd always known this as Smith Park from the time I was a little kid. That we always played there. It was across the street from the elementary school, and we felt proud because of our heritage. My grandfather was Joseph Benjamin Smith, and he, was a man who had a brick mason company here, and he actually donated brick. He had my father, who was Robert Smith, and his brother, Jack, and some of the other, as his cousins, Sonny Hansen, I think his name was Carson Hansen, actually helped, donated their time to build the original bathrooms, because it meant something to them. It was land that was donated by a member of their family, and it was part of their community, and it meant something to them. And I would just, as all these other people have said before me, they said it so nicely, I think it should be renamed back to what it was, to Smith Park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Kathleen Ross Kelly, and I get to be the dissenting person because I've only lived here 28 years, and I'm not related to a Smith. But when I found out they were going to change the name of Founders Park, I got sick, just because I don't even know who William R. Smith is. And like I said, I've lived here 28 years, and no one's ever said anything about it. So I was pretty upset. So I went to the statue we have over here, and his name is listed, so I kind of found out who he was. And then there's a plaque with all the other families that have made Centerville great. Today before I came, I stopped and went through the book of the Centerville Heritage. We have a lot of families in this community that have done a lot to make Centerville what it is today, not just the Smith family. So that's kind of why I like the founder's name. Plus, I think it includes me in that name, because I've been here, I've made a contribution, my kids have been raised here. And so founders includes us. It doesn't include us in the Smith part. And on the plaque it says, Centerville was populated by a mix of pioneers from widely scattered places and different cultures. These pioneers came together for a common cause, and they generally discovered that the talent, skills, and determination needed for survival were founded among themselves. And so I'd like to see it left as Founders Park to include everybody, to be inclusive of everybody that's ever lived here and made a contribution to Centerville.
Thank you.
I'm Ann Casper, and I've always lived in Centerville, so for 63 years now. And I too remember that it was always Smith Park. And I kind of have a question back there as to why we can't change it back to that, with respect to, we have Smoot Park, we have Porter Walton Park. Why don't we change it back to the original name over Founders Park? Thanks.
My name is Phil Sessions. I am William R. Smith's great-grandson. I know that Uncle Dave gave that property to the county to honor his father. And I can't imagine why they wanted to change the name. And I would surely like to see people be as good as their word and change it back to the William R. Smith Park. And while I'm on my feet, I would like to pay tribute to the JCs. There were 22 hard-working JCs. They started the 4th of July, the celebration, the parade, the Easter egg hunt, the everything that Centerville had, the Christmas decorations. the J.C. started through hard work. Out of those 22 hard-working individuals, there are 5 tough ones of us left, living here in Centerville. There is Bill Arbuckle, Christensen, Dave Jensen, myself, and Dallas Workman. We're the tough one of the bunch, and we would all like you to see and be as good as your word and name it William R. Smith Park. Thank you.
Just a minute. Do you know when that park was made? Phil? We just wondered if anyone knows when the park actually became a park.
In the 50s or 1955. It was completed in 57.
That explains the gap.
He forgot to say that JC's
Can
wives.
Some things never change.
My name's John Smith. My father was Ben Smith, bricklayer, and Phil rounded us all up every time something had to be done for nothing. And we did all the work over there on the things, and we respected Dad, and he didn't pay us for doing it, but we was scared of Phil, so we worked whether we liked it or not. But, it was our understanding then it was the Smith Park, but I don't live in Centerville anymore. I couldn't find an ugly enough girl here in Centerville to marry me, so I went to Bow and found an ugly one. And I finally found something that I was compatible with. But I can't see why there's any problem with changing it back to Smith. I don't know how, well, you told me what was changed, but a lot of us, if you don't change it back, we want our wages. Thank you.
Anybody else who would like to speak? Well, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and thank you for educating us. Some great stories, and I've certainly learned a lot about William R. Smith the last 2 months. I appreciate the feedback. So I'll turn this to the council. We kind of decided on a contemplative process for something that's significant to the community, to take some time to receive comment and contemplate the changes, evaluate what would have to happen if you were to do this.
So I'm going to just wholly be unpopular tonight. I want to speak to this issue because I want to explain the way I'm going to vote. I absolutely am grateful and thankful for the donation of the land from the Smith family, for all the work, for the idea of honoring William Smith. I absolutely would want to do that. I think that a plaque dedicated, a large plaque, maybe even a statue dedicated solely to him and telling his story would be even more significant. The thing that was interesting to me is I was flexible either way. I was really interested to get more information on the history. And what was surprising to me is that reading the history actually convinced me even more firmly to keep the name Founders Park, and I'll just explain why. I feel like the reason this issue has come up over and over and over again is because for some reason for the residents, the name Smith Park hasn't stuck. So when it came up in 1969 to officially name it, from 1969 to 1989, I've heard stories of it being called Cowboy and Indian Park, and that the report is that the name Smith Park wasn't ever universally or widely used by the community. And so if that were the issue for that 20 years, so much so that the council in 1989 felt like that they needed to find a name that would stick for the entire community, if for almost 30 years Founders Park has stuck, my concern is one of a practical concern. And that is, if we make this change, I absolutely do want to honor William R. Smith. If we make the change, though, for the citizens as a whole in the city, which I'm trying to represent as best I can, I feel that it would just cause confusion, that the name Founders Park would continue being used, but the sign would be changed and it would say Smith Park. And it seems like all this history is laid out because past councils were trying to find a name that would stick with the citizens. So I feel that the public has spoken by having that name stick for as long as it did.
And ironically, I talked to my younger sister on this topic, and she said, it's Smith Park. I don't know why they ever started calling it something else. I remember I was little at the time, and they came up with some name, but it's Smith Park. And she's younger than I am, so. And we're not related to the Smiths.
My kids came home one day and said they'd been at Founders Park, and they were in all kinds of trouble because I didn't know they'd changed the name, and I didn't know where they'd been. So I grew up here, and it's like, where is Founders Park? It was always Smith Park, and I've lived my entire life here. And so growing up, yeah, there was a cowboy and Indian toy there, but it was always Smith Park. So I didn't know when the name was changed. I guess I got busy raising my family and didn't pay attention to it, but I was shocked when I found out it was. I've heard a lot of great things about William R. Smith. I think that's great, and I think sometimes we have to look at the good things people do in order to name something after them. But for me, it's just, no matter what he did other than give the property, to me the fact that his son gave the property trying to honor his father. I mean, people say we should be honoring all of the founders, but there wouldn't be a park there to honor anybody if they had done what 99% of the people in Centerville do. They sell their property. If that property had been sold, there would be no downtown park. So I feel like they did it to honor him, and we're kind of dishonoring the family by not. You know, I had always heard that it was supposed to be, you know, that there had been an agreement and then it was a gentleman's agreement. And I was interested when I read in our packet that it said that the original deed is not what we're reading, that could have been on the original deed, but that we don't no longer have that. So we don't really have any way of knowing whether it was a gentleman's agreement at all, or a handshake. But I feel like giving that amount of land to Centerville was a great. I don't see anybody coming and offering us that kind of land now for a park. I wish they would.
Well, I'm going to take both sides of this issue tonight. And one of so the reason I asked about what happened between 1934 and 1953 is there wasn't a park. The park, as we've heard, is a 1950s creation. So if you're conveying something for the purpose of a park, why did it take 20 years to become a park? That's just a general question, because I have to look at it.
Because it was hard labor.
You could have, CCC, there were plenty of ways you could have come up with labor in the 30s. I mean, there are other parks and trails that were built in that period of time. So there's that issue, just from a practical standpoint, because the use was not defined until later. One of the things that I've read in the packet quite a bit, and this is the problem when you go with large gaps of time, and then you have what's legend and what's on paper. And on paper, I don't see that this is actually, this is what it is. I mean, we've heard comments about honor a gentleman's agreement. I'd love to do that if I had some evidence of it. And what would make it even stronger for that is if it was donated in 1934 and say 1938 there was a park there. That would make more sense to me. And this is not in any way to dishonor the memory of ancestors, but we have to recognize, and I don't want to belittle councils of the past. They made decisions based on available information. Why would they have named it Founders Park? Well, they had one of their relatives who actually, as the letter I read, said that it would be inclusive. And Tammy pointed out this a little bit, which is, and Centerville does suffer from this problem. There's a difference between whether it's my town or our town. Now, I've only been here 14 years, which makes me a carpetbagger in a lot of ways. And that was something that was very noticeable when we moved in. We came from a different area, and I was not related to any founding family in any way, shape, or form. And there's a bit of ostracism that takes place in that.
How did we let you stay?
Just by sheer tenacity, you couldn't kick me out. So I think that if I were to look back and put myself in the place of the council at that point, Founders is inclusive. And it does cover more than one individual, which I don't think that we can say that that council necessarily made a bad call. They were trying to be inclusive and break away from that my town, our town. And it's really tough as a tight-knit community with a lot of descendants. How do you incorporate everyone else that's come in, or are they not welcome? I think it's a valid concern. So I can see why they went that way.
You said you were going to be on both sides.
Oh, I should argue the other side. Okay. Fair enough.
You argued so well, so go ahead.
No, I was going to, how about we have some other comments and I'll come back to it. No, the other side is the same. There are some significant contributions that are on record. It's not uncommon across the country to have monuments to famous people and parks named after them. That's not uncommon. Like I say, with the whole conveyance and the amount of time, I'm not sure about the original intent, but
And I am happy and desirous to tell the whole story and to create some sort of monument for the donation of the land and the history. I've loved this process. I've loved the richer knowledge of the history that I received. But I agree, I feel that I'm maybe kind of representing those who've lived here 30 years or less, and that's a lot of our Centerville residents, a lot.
So I'd like to go back to Grant's comment. Kids these days need heroes. They are looking for heroes in a lot of places. And I love the idea of a child or a teen coming to a park and seeing a name that isn't familiar and plugging it into the phone and figuring out what great things somebody has done in the past that they can learn from. And I love the fact that Centerville has a lot of those people. William R. Smith was one. He's by no means the only one. Many of them are honored by names of streets or names of other parks, and I would love to see more of our founders honored. I love Shauna's idea, and thank you for reminding us of it, of going back and honoring those founding families and putting plaques about them on our pavilion over there, so that as we come to the park that is right here next to City Hall, we can learn about our roots, about founding fathers who may not be related to us in any way, but that's okay, it's our roots. And I don't think there needs to be a feeling of, they are not my people. I have heritage in this city, not because of my last name, but because I claim the people. And that's not a blood claiming. That's a mindset. It's a saying, I agree with the things they stood for, and I'm going to adopt that as mine. And I think that's something that we should forward. We should put those names out there so that those youth who are looking for a good role model have those names to look up and can say, hey, there's that guy that park is named after. I could be like him.
well, I would be really interested. I know you don't have much voice, Paul, but you've been with this issue for many years. What have been the deliberations in the past? How have you voted, and why? I mean, it would be interesting to, you've got a longer perspective than this council.
Thanks, George.
You're welcome. Well, you said 14 years, you know.
I don't remember this ever coming for a vote when it came up before, coming to a formal vote. There was plenty of discussion about it, but there was, in the past, the prior councils, I think, were willing to stick with the status quo of Founders Park. However, I really had hoped that during the centennial year, when we had proposed to rename the pavilion, the William R. Smith Pavilion, and put something up there to commemorate that we could have done something like that. I thought the centennial year was an appropriate time to do that, and try to, I think, recognizing individuals and telling their stories is a valuable thing to do. if I don't have a vote here.
But if you did, if I were to proxy mine to you tonight, what would it be?
If I did, I would go back and say, I want to name it the William R. Smith Pavilion, put a plaque on it, tell a story, but I would probably leave it as Founders Park just to try to recognize the larger effort. But I think something needs to be done to commemorate the family's contribution specifically, but recognizing that
Well, thanks for letting me put you on the spot.
Yeah,
I mean, it would be interesting to know. Yeah.
But to George, I do think there are people that are still alive that do know it was given as a park. I mean, I wish we could go back and talk to David Smith, but I do think there are people that do absolutely know that it was given as a park.
But how do you know something? You can believe it.
But if they were here at the time.
But is that...
Still would be inadmissible in court as hearsay.
Was it legally, or was it a discussion? And none of us can know that because we don't have the records.
We actually have been told, and there's the letter from an attorney threatening the city that there's a reverter clause. If you don't do this, we can come get the property back. That's not in what we have.
No follow-through.
So we have to be careful distinguishing between fact and what's been built up over time as legend. And that's just part of the decision process.
And I'm just going to say one more thing again. I've said it in another meeting, but I want to say it in tonight's record. And that is, from just a practical standpoint, even if we did change the name of the park, there's the inertia of 30 years of it being Founders Park. And we can learn from our neighbors to the south that they pay a lot of money to build beautiful monument signs for renamed parks that never get called that name and just confuse people. Where's Zessiger Park? Where's Tolman Park? What's Cheese Park called sign? I don't know, because it's just Cheese.
Twin Hollow.
I didn't even know that, and I go up there all the time.
But we're not changing the name. We're reinstating a name that a lot of people already still call it.
I respect everything that's been said, and I respect the Smith family and the contribution.
So the way we resolve these things, we have good discussions, and then we just have to vote.
Yep.
And you work it out.
I move that we reinstate the name of the park to the William R. Smith Park.
So we have a motion. Does that carry any? We often complain from Washington that they make unfunded mandates to mandate changes and then don't fund how it's to be done or provide the financial means to do that.
I'll tell you the financial means. After looking at the laundry list of what needs to be done in order to actually change the name, the only thing I think that carries any dollar sign that's not a search and replace on the computer or something like that would be the name of the park on some sort of signage there. That can be funded through the RAP tax, which our citizens have kindly funded for the next 10 years. I don't think it needs to be done tonight. I don't think it even needs to be done by the end of the summer, but I think the RAP tax is a good source for that.
So a motion on the table to reinstate the original name of and replace Founders Park with William R. Smith Park and using RAP tax funding to cover any necessary costs.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? Bill, let's start the voting with you.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
That passes 4-1. So,
Could I make a follow-up motion?
You can. Before you all leave, understanding the very impressive communication that the Smith family has and the resources and your ability to motivate, we'd love to have the Smith family come together and potentially, maybe it's the next 4th of July celebration, raise some money to donate to improve potentially the sign that we would put there, if you're interested in doing that, and help us raise some money to fund a nice plaque that would tell the story of William R. Smith. And if that would be something that might be meaningful to your family and would obviously help the city.
There used to be a plaque. Does anyone know where the plaque went or what was on it? When there was the red brick down here on the west side of the park, there was a plaque, and I remember reading it, but I don't remember what it says, and I don't know what happened to it. Does anyone know?
Nope. Doesn't sound like it.
I would move that we explore the suggestion that Mrs. Essig made us.
Second. I'm not even going to let her finish it.
About recognizing multiple founding families on the pavilion with plaques.
It's moved in second, and we explore that. Would you be willing to consider upping, maybe making that part of the 4th of July celebration?
I think that would be excellent for the 4th of July.
But we got to figure out how to fund that, whether it's through the foundation or whether
maybe
you take some of the 5% that's going to the
or-
Whitaker Museum, and each year the Whitaker Museum writes,
Or maybe from our 5% that we
writes
budget
that
for
up and
whatever.
says, here's what we want to do this year, here's the person we want
I'd like to look into it.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Because I think,
Do it slowly and honor different families.
I think
Yeah, a different family each year would be
you don't want a
fabulous.
different person putting their own, you want some
No,
consistency.
I want a consistent. yeah.
Right.
I can't hear anything you're saying. Can't hear you. For the record.
We'll just, I move that we have a break right now.
Let's have a break.
I agree.
We'll table.
And then we'll rewind the last 3 minutes or 4 minutes.
And then you'll tell me what you said.
Then we'll tell you what we said.
Hey, carpetbaggers have to stick together. Well, no, I mean, Tammy's are about the same. I think she's been here
You raised some good points. To me, the strongest thing is I will never be there. I have done the work for you.
I wish That's
defendable.
So is all the easy stuff left?
Is there any easy stuff?
Yeah.
We got a work session.
You have to start at 5:30.
We're coming back for budget because we have to, we gave Steve a few directions. I don't know if we'll necessarily stay long, but we have use of proceeds for the tax increase and I don't know if we necessarily need to tweak the individual categories that much. The only thing I think is the true contingency should just roll right back into general fund. It can always be reallocated from there rather than leaving it off in this HR true contingency thing. I'm not comfortable with that.
So you'll just be by yourself now?
Yeah, all the fun and excitement's over.
Usually most of the people are happy with your staff.
Well,
This was the big issue.
this is the big issue, yeah.
Yes, this is available from the city website. Yes.
I just wish
Should be able to
my
find it.
great-great-grandfather was not a printer. If he had land, he would have been honored. Brother Brigham sent him to print hymnals in Fillmore and then back up to print hymnals in Salt Lake. He never had time to get land. If he'd been a farmer, he would have been okay.
My grandpa's on the Platte River, the country doctor, so. And then, my dad was the youngest baby, he lived in Nigeria.
That Brigham Freedom Hills, so big.
have a break going on video. Robin, I'm so sorry. Will you keep us posted?
Okay, we are back in session. As the commotion was starting, Stephanie made a motion to follow up on Shauna Essig's suggestion.
Yes. I move that we explore Shauna Essig's idea further. She had, I guess, 2 council meetings ago, maybe 3, I forget when we were discussing this, she suggested that we go through the founding families that are listed in the book and do a plaque and say for each 4th of July represent and discuss one family and put that plaque on a pillar of the pavilion, so that what we end up with is a founders pavilion with those founding families represented on the pavilion pillars. So I'd like to explore that further and see how many pillars there are, how many families there are, what we can come up with, because I think that's a great idea to really honor them.
It is a great idea, and Paul mentioned maybe turning it over to the Whitaker Museum staff and board, because I think there'd be some preliminary research. How do we limit it? What dates are we talking about to try to keep
that's why I said in the book, because the research has already been done quite a bit there in the Centennial book.
Yeah, there's actually some inaccuracies in there, so
okay.
I would think that that's a good starting place, but I would love to have the museum staff look at it.
Let's explore. I think if you'll take it to the museum board,
I will do that.
Steve and I will take it to the 4th of July host committee, and I think the 4th of July is a good time to do it, but we need something more continuous than the 4th of July committee, which changes on a regular basis.
Right.
Yeah, I think museum board is an excellent suggestion.
I would just make one suggestion. It's not part of the motion necessarily as much as it would be the practicalities. Same size plaque, doesn't
Yes.
matter how many wives you had, it's all got to fit in the same text area. Because we don't want to create this, look how big my monument is to your
Right.
monument. These all need to be
Right.
the same size.
Right.
Good statement. I agree.
Good guidance. So
So do we need a second to a motion?
I think a motion, then a second from you, Bill.
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. Let's see if we can do this one in less than the time allotted. Management Services Department, we've discussed this
Thoroughly.
many times. We have an ordinance 2017-22 to create a Management Services Department as the first item here. Steve, do you have a staff report on this, or are you ready for action?
I doubt you want a staff report in addition to what I put in the packet, right? Or do you? You don't need any more, do you?
I don't, but
I don't.
You got-
No. Motion to adopt ordinance 2017-22.
Can we do all three together?
Sure. I don't.
I don't think
Let's
so.
do them
They're numbered
separately.
ordinances, so we have to do them separately, don't we? Votes for each ordinance, 2017, or can I wrap all of them together?
You can wrap all of them together.
Okay. All right, let me motion again. Motion to adopt ordinance 2017-22, ordinance 2017-23, and resolution 2017-14.
Second.
So moved and second, we approve these 2 ordinances and a resolution that effectively create the Management Services Department, amend and upgrade the position pay grade schedule to match these changes, and then appoint Jake Smith as the Management Services Director and Finance Director.
Effective April 13.
Effective last.
April, August. Excuse me.
Wow, retroactive.
I have to
Excuse
pull my
me.
motion there.
Excuse me, effective August 13.
August 13th?
I think that's in the resolution, though, isn't it? So, all right, you don't need to add that to it then, because that's in the resolution.
Just to be sure, let's do this by roll call vote. For further discussion on this before we vote, Bill?
Just curious, why August 13?
Coincides with a payroll period. And it also coincides with completion, pretty closely coincides with completing this budget process. So we're getting through this and then I'm turning it over to him.
Okay.
Hopefully with things in good order to move forward.
Aye.
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 before I vote, I was just going to say, the public hasn't heard a ton about this, and I think that they need to be aware that this decision really is based on the fact that it's going to save us money, improve our financial accountability, and give us some flexibility we haven't had in the past. For those reasons, I'm voting aye.
That passes.
Nicely stated.
4-0. Good reasoning, and I would add this has been represents an effort of last more than 6 months of study and design on how to improve the structure of the organization.
And can I say thank you?
Welcome to the deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
Okay.
No more 2-week vacations for you.
Item number 6, Prop 1 County Grant Application Discussion.
All right. As I said in the staff report, that we submitted letters of intent for 4 projects, but 2 of those, based on the comments of the commissioners recently, in my opinion, are not viable applications.
What's the second?
Well, one of them is the sidewalk repair, and the other is the hillside access application, because they made comments, maybe not in that meeting, but, it was in a more recent meeting, they made comments to me about the Fire Break Road and not viewing that as one that they wanted to spend Proposition 1 money on.
That's interesting, because I thought I heard the opposite of that in our work
Well, you may have
session.
heard trail, trails that connect communities, which you might think would mean Bonneville Shoreline Trail, but you weren't in the meeting, were you?
I was not either. You told me about it, that they wanted to be consistent and not use Prop 1 funds for the Fire Break Road itself, but they wanted to make improvements to that, maybe as part of a maintenance program, but not as part of Prop 1.
Right, which I was going to report on later under city manager's report here. So whether,
your opinion is?
Well, first of all, the council did not well define what they mean by hillside access. And so I presumed that it included improvements to the road to the extent to get you to a trailhead or whatever.
Right, only for the intent of access to the trailhead, which I think is a regional aspect.
So if you want to pursue that as an application, I would suggest you zero in on trailhead or something that, again, they talked about regionalism, so it needs to, I assume, a trailhead that connects to a trail that is considered a regional trail, and that one you could argue is Bonneville Shoreline Trail.
Wasn't part of that an effort to get some parking up there?
There was discussion about that, but we have not defined it well. So
Okay.
we either need to, I think, drop it from the list for this year and redefine what we're looking for, or see if we can come to some kind of agreement on what would the specific project be. Maybe task someone to go and figure out, okay, what is the specific project scope, and then come back and say, yes, I want to do this.
Have you heard anything back from them on these things?
Well, I've heard back regarding sidewalks. You heard what I heard.
Well, yeah, but they
And
didn't.
then
They hadn't even seen them at that point in time.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had submitted our letters of intent.
No, but they told us during the meeting, when they told us that the sidewalks didn't qualify, that they hadn't even looked at them yet.
Right, we'd submitted them.
Right.
Right. But no, I haven't had.
So you haven't had anything direct back?
No, no. Other than what I heard about the Fire Break Road the other day. And it wasn't because I asked them specifically. It was, the meeting I was in was regarding the maintenance of the Fire Break Road. And in that conversation, they mentioned that they would not be using Proposition 1 money for the Fire Break Road. So that's the basis for my comment, that unless you more clearly define what you mean by hillside access and want to submit an application under a clear definition, then I don't know that that's a viable application at this time. The other two that we submitted, one was for bus stops on Main Street, which we're going to talk about some more, and the other was the restroom on the Legacy Parkway Trail. I will express somewhat of a hesitancy on the Legacy Parkway Trail because once we commit money to it, we also will be committing, I presume, to maintain it. I would rather see the county.
I'd rather see the county maintain it.
County build it and maintain it because it's a county trail.
Yeah.
So can we not make that our, I mean, what could we do something to contribute and say, look, this is a 90% county Prop 1 project. You know, we'll contribute some manpower or maybe help with utilities, but I don't like us having ongoing maintenance responsibility for it. It should be it's a shared regional facility across the trail, and the maintenance should be shared.
I mean, I could enlist my fellow city managers from South Davis, from Farmington to North Salt Lake, and see if we can collectively put pressure on them to use Proposition 1 money for that. I know West Bountiful didn't put in for that kind of a thing. They only submitted one project, and that's the one that we can add to the list for consideration, and that's the improvement of 1250 West between Centerville and West Bountiful.
Can you just be really clear on that, because the picture that you put up there didn't have the overlay on it?
Right, and this is an evolving thing. Even as recently as today, I talked with the city engineer of West Bountiful, and they want to enlarge the scope. But let me make sure the council understands. We didn't submit this in a letter of intent, but West Bountiful did, at least for their part of that road. And I spoke with Jeff Euler, asking him if we could join in with West Bountiful's application, because they did send in a letter of intent pertaining to this road. And I was told that yes, we could, and hey, that's a great idea. Now that's from Jeff. I don't know that we should read too much into that we would have a very competitive application. But I think it would be very competitive for several reasons.
Well, can you tell us exactly what's being funded by the developer, and what do we ask?
Well, I don't know what. Oh, okay. You mean the storage unit?
Yes, the storage unit's funding up to 75 North.
Where's that high-tech one? Oh, right there. There goes my battery. Storage units are here, and they're building more, I think, in front of those. Or are they replacing those? I'm not sure. But anyway, there's a storage unit project that has been approved that is going through the permitting process now. So it's going to begin soon. They will be required to widen this road from here to here, put in curb and gutter and sidewalk. So we'll have the improvement down to here.
On the east side.
On the east side. The road is improved all the way down to the city limit line, Centerville city limit line right now on the west side.
With no sidewalks.
With no sidewalk, and a sidewalk is problematic because there's berm there and trees. On a sidewalk, to accommodate it, you'd have to put in a retaining wall to save the trees, or you'd have to wipe out the trees. Anyway, it didn't seem too practical, and so we talked about the east side as being more practical for the sidewalk. And initially, we talked about the improvement being all the way down here and tying into this improved area, although this area doesn't have a sidewalk, it's just parking lots. And so you'd have a sidewalk ending at this parking lots. People would be walking through the parking lots. If you zoom in and scroll
down a little, Jake, there's sidewalk where the residences start on the west side? Or there's no sidewalk on the west side where the residential? Right here? Residential.
There's sidewalk on the west side up to here, I believe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then there's this unimproved section up to the city limit line where the road ideally should be widened, curb and gutter, and sidewalk.
And that's part of Bountiful's proposed project, right?
West Bountiful.
West Bountiful's.
Initially, they considered improving just this side. Scroll it down, Jake. And then the pedestrians would cross over and go on this new sidewalk on this side up to where the storage unit project will put it in. That was a cost estimate of about $180,000. This was prepared by the West Bountiful city engineer, this concept plan and cost estimate. Today, however, he says that they want to submit an application that it includes improving this section as well. So both sides of the road within their city, as well as this piece up here. And that might take the cost, he just talking from the top of his head, he's gonna do an updated.
Sidewalk still only on the west side?
No, I think sidewalk on both sides in that case. But on the east side, you realize the sidewalk would stop.
Yeah, so where's his proposed crosswalk now?
Well, right here.
Right there?
If the sidewalk was to come, the road improvement and sidewalk came down to this point.
On the east side?
On the east side, then the pedestrians would cross over and the sidewalk and road improvement would continue down to tie into this sidewalk here. I think he's saying from my conversation today with him that they want to improve both sides, get the road to its final status. And I think he meant sidewalk on both sides.
Then it would make sense to bring the crosswalk down to an intersection, right? And not do it in the middle of the road.
Perhaps, yeah. But he's going to update the conceptual and the cost estimate off the top of his head. He's thinking it might be $75,000 more than the 180. I'm going to say I'm assuming we're somewhere in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. If you have 4, potentially 5 partners, you have West Bountiful, Centerville, UTA, who I've spoken to, and they seem willing to make some of the dollars allocated to Centerville under Proposition 1 available for this because of the last mile policy, providing improvements within the mile of the bus stop for bicyclists and pedestrians. By the way, this would have bike lanes added, according to the West Bountiful city engineer. So West Bountiful, Centerville, UTA, and Proposition 1 money from Davis County. And possibly we ought to at least approach the property owners and see if we can convince them to contribute some money and enhance the competitiveness of the application. I think it would enhance the competitiveness if the property owners would kick in something.
So are you comfortable identifying the property owners there for me? I don't.
Well, the only one within Centerville is Masco, Robert Mason. Okay. I don't know who's the property owner here is probably.
That's part of the.
What's that business called now?
Cyril.
Well, it used to be called Cyril.
A new
Trinity. What are they called now? How come it hasn't come to mind?
I knew until you
Isn't it
asked.
Trinity?
Yeah, Trinity. It was Trinity Highway Products.
Yeah. I think they own this piece.
I think so.
And I don't know who owns this piece. Maybe they do too, down to here somewhere. And then over here you have, I don't know who owns in the West Bountiful section, but I think we ought to at least ask. Now, like I say, I think it would be a competitive project. It's regional in the sense that it improves the connection between 2 cities. It would have the multi-benefits of bike lanes, sidewalks. Our share, I'm going to say, might be $50,000. If you get a $250,000 to $300,000 road for improvement for $50,000, then sounds like pretty good leverage to me. Where would that leave us with our other applications? The bus stops on Main Street, we have the 6 bus stops that UTA has proposed funding with their proposition, with Centerville's allocation of Proposition 1 money, although they did ask us if we could kick in some money, or ask the county to kick in some money. That's what it was. some county Proposition 1 money.
I think we still propose that because we want to talk about UT's or UDOT's feedback on that, but that's really no out-of-pocket money for Centerville.
Sure, I'll volunteer the county's money.
The issue there is whether the pullouts are part of that or not, and Tammy has raised the issue that
Yeah, if we get in that situation and then we're giving control of our Main Street right-of-way to UDOT, then.
Yeah, so why don't I just take a minute and report on it?
Yes.
So Steve and I met with.
Could I time out and
Yeah.
just ask, do we have any potential right-of-way issues or things with the fronts of those property owners if we are widening the road?
Well, if we do, that should be what we ask them to contribute at a minimum. And why wouldn't they? Because before they could develop their property someday, they'd have to dedicate the land and fund all the improvements. I don't.
Gain for them.
So what if Bob Masco says, "You're not on my Christmas card list"?
Well, yeah, if we have to have right-of-way from him and he doesn't agree to it, then that probably kills the project.
I think he'd
Because
probably agree to right away. He just wouldn't agree to pay for any of the curb and gutter, would be my guess.
Well, I think that's the question is, can they contribute just the right-of-way, right? So we don't have to get into a.
Do you think it's still a good idea to give him the curb and gutter for free, whereas normally he'd have to pay for it if we wait till development?
Oh, absolutely. If I owned that land and I had a chance to get a road improved by simply deeding right-of-way, which I'd have to deed someday anyway before I could improve my property.
No, but is that a good deal for the city? Because normally he would have to pay for those.
Well, is it a good deal for the city? Yes and no. Not a good deal if he otherwise will be developing it within the next few years on his own. Is it a good deal for the city? I would suggest if we get by for $50,000, it probably is.
We'd have to pay for the sidewalk anyway.
Well, and just the whole connectivity and access for our residents. I mean, I go down that way all the time, biking and running. So it's just, that corner is kind of a part of our south end of our community. Because we go down Pages Lane and come back into town through that street.
I mean, there's a couple of ways we could approach this. If you wanted to take a hard position on this, you could say, and I could carry the message to the property owners that, look, we're not going to do this project unless.
Then we have to follow through.
Yeah.
Well, I say we submit the application.
Yeah, there's a few trigger points before the unless.
Yeah. I think we should talk to the property owners. I think we should look at a partnership with Davis County UTA and West Bountiful and.
That's great.
And see if we can come up with a plan to support West Bountiful's application there. Maybe make it a joint application.
And I would, yeah, it would be a joint application because we didn't submit a letter of intent, but we would join in with their application and sign on to their application. Right. This is their only project they're submitting, so it's their highest priority. I would suggest that you consider it as our highest priority among what we've got and what information we know at this time. Maybe the second priority is bus stop improvements, assuming we can get them, and you may not have 6 of them, you may have 3 or 4, and those might be bus stops that we're not going to have pullouts on, for example. Because based on our conversation today, it's a kind of a case-by-case thing where.
So we met with Chris Peterson from UDOT to talk about one access for the new fire station, and he gave us kind of how do you go about getting a variance to allow fire trucks to pull out on Main Street. Because
Gave you instructions?
He gave us guidance on how to navigate the UDOT variance process, because by default every answer is no when you first apply, and then you can, there's a variance process. Then we talked about the bus stops on Main Street. His message was quite different from the message we got from UTA, which is, the message from UTA was UDOT won't let us do anything unless we do pullouts. His message was, okay, we looked at this, we want you to consider pullouts where they make sense, and if you think there's not any reason to, if you're not willing to do a pullout, we need to know why. And he said, as I look at these, you're right, a couple of these don't make sense for pullouts. But we want you to go through the process, design the pullout, look at it. If it doesn't make any sense, explain why. If it's possible, then we want pullouts. And we discussed the idea that pullouts actually don't help bus traffic. Sometimes they cause problems, and he recognized that.
So they want us to, are we the ones supposed to be designing them? Are we? Oh,
They already have,
So
actually.
so if UTA is going to them and they're commenting back to UTA, but his, and Steve, you characterize this, they act like the approver and not the designer. So they're giving comments, but it's our application to them, that we're in control of the application, us and UTA together, and that they don't see us as, that they're not going to go off and design something and say, we're absolutely doing this, in cahoots with UTA without your consent. If we don't want it, they say, when Chris's perspective was, we're not going to do anything you don't want us to do. We're not going to approve stuff you don't want us to, but we're going to try to influence your project, and we may not approve it until you kind of get it to the.
And one of the reasons, let me add to that, if I may, one of the key factors that might determine that you don't have a pullout is because by putting in a pullout, you have to get additional right-of-way from the neighboring property owner. And he said if the neighboring property owner is not willing to cooperate with you on that, then that's pretty clear to us that we probably shouldn't do one there, can't do one there.
You get a letter from the property owner saying, I'm not going to sell, and boom, that's good enough for them.
Okay.
We also discussed the widening issue. Does this potentially widen the right-of-way? His opinion was, no, this does not. There's the only way to widen a right-of-way, in his opinion, is to get it on the long-term plan first and have it on their long-term plan.
Which this is not. The widening of the Main Street is not on the long-term plan, and that's where he also said, if Centerville doesn't want it, we're not going to do it.
And it says first it has to be on the long-term plan, then it has to have funding. Even if you have funding, if it's not on the long-term plan, it's against the law for him to do it. The legislature tells him that, but it hasn't been put on the long-term
No, I know
plan.
that, but any movement that direction is
Yeah,
not.
he understands there's lots of concerns about that, but he could see why people could be concerned about that. He didn't see that as a risk of a pullout, because getting a few feet for a pullout is very different than trying to widen a whole corridor.
So my bottom line question is, can we submit for this, submit for the 6 bus stops, see what UDOT's feedback is? If they're insistent on any of them being pullouts, say, we don't feel comfortable with pullout, but still take what we can get with anything else. Can it be flexible like that?
It can to some extent. As we were talking, he says if you come back and say, no, we're not going to do any pullouts because we don't like them and there's not great justification for some of them, if you've got a lot of space and you've got a willing seller but you just don't want to do it, then we're going to push back on that. But maybe if you find 1 or 2 that might work for a pullout.
If we get in any situation where we then get forced to do a pullout, I would just say hold off and don't apply at all.
Well,
I would agree with you on that one, because the mess of trying to get a bus back into traffic, it's already enough of a nightmare trying to merge when you're headed northbound on Main Street from Parish Lane.
But I've never seen a timid bus driver yet. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be a problem them getting back out into traffic.
But there's a long list.
But there's some safety issues.
There are safety issues, but there are also benefits the other way too, because then you're out of the traffic flow while you're doing things like putting bikes on the front of the bus and things like that. I think there are merits either way.
I think it's worth it to consider if there's somewhere where there's a decent amount of space.
How big is the pullout?
Was it 4 feet or 8? And then so you gotta have another 4 feet.
Well, they don't create a pullout as wide as the bus. They use part of the shoulder, they use the shoulder for part of that width, and then they take a few more feet for the pullout itself. Just enough to get the bus over so traffic can continue going by, but I don't know what that.
The bus is 40 feet, so it's gonna be.
I thought you meant how wide,
I meant both.
how deep.
So I was gonna say, so it's gonna be 6 by 50 or 6 by 60?
I'm sorry, they did send us some drawings, UTA did, but I can't remember what that is.
I would think your 6 by 60 is probably close, if not right
It was
on.
either 4 or 6. It wasn't as deep, it wasn't the full bus length deep, but. So
Well,
we have to consider, are we willing to
It would have to be
compromise?
length.
It's probably lengthwise, the
It's
length.
double length, it's 80 feet long.
With that
I mean, these are
angle.
gonna be kind of monstrosity cuts into our Main Street right-of-way, which one of my major goals has always been to put elements in place that help keep it a narrow field, which makes it a safer place, it makes it friendlier for all the other users. And so there are
There's traffic concerns too.
Yeah.
You turn on Parish Lane, turning right, and the bus is stopped right there.
Well, we're gonna change that location for that reason. I agree that is hugely problematic, so we've talked about changing the location of that bus stop is the solution to that.
But what is so bad if you've got a lot of space there, say in front of the, and maybe the post office is a great, if you've got the space to having a pullout, if you've got.
Well, if you've got the space, but I question that there's space at any of them.
Mm-hmm. There could be, and I
There
don't
could
wanna
be, but I question it.
So I think it's worth doing the analysis. You gotta play the game and go through the analysis.
Sure.
Because going back to you.
I don't like to play the game.
I know, but
Yeah.
if you go to UDOT and say, I don't like it, it's my principle is I don't support pullouts, and therefore I'm gonna fight you on this.
But it would be based on research and data if we took that
Well,
approach. There'd be a
but
list
They
of-
have their research.
They have
and
their
data.
research and data to
Right, so
support the other
who's the
side.
final say? That's my
Well,
question.
They are.
to Paul's point, a theoretical overlay is completely different in agreement to the actual on-the-ground engineering when they get there and try and look at it. I think you should look at it from the pullout perspective and then negotiate after the fact if you need to. Because
Sure, so
I'm
they
sure our
put-
city engineer is going to have some input on this as well.
Pull out down in front of the junior high school.
It's not going to work.
David's school district isn't gonna approve that.
No, yeah, that's not.
That's not a
And
location.
there's no room on either side to do
There's
that.
6 locations that they are proposing to make these improvements. If you start from the north, the first 2 are across from each
Why don't you
other.
just pull up Google Maps, Jake.
Yeah, Jake.
Google Maps has the bus stops on by default. It's
Um,
Bonita Way. And
The entrance to Pinea, the road that leads into Pinea Gardens, and it's Bonita on the east side, that intersection. South of that intersection would be 2 of them on opposite sides. And that was a place, for example, where he said, clearly it's not going to work for the city to try to get more right-of-way on that east side where you have that private yard and that fence that's right there, that fairly expensive fence.
So if you zoom in and go to satellite view, the bus stops will pop up.
Yeah, okay, so, right, go north, keep going, hold it.
Right there.
Right here, these 2. These are the first 2 from going north to south that they're proposing among the 6.
And we looked at that and he said, yeah, these really don't make sense.
To do a pullout.
To do a pullout on either side. Says, like, you might get a shelter on the west, you're probably not gonna get a shelter on the east because it was Grandma Dukes, what was it? They had a big sign up with the boxing gloves that she's a fighter, so we're probably not gonna get anything out of her, was my assumption.
So go.
Is that all it takes is the right
Move,
side?
no, move, I'm sorry, to the south. Okay, right there. So this bus stop remains. This bus stop comes down here in front of the post office.
Which is one of my areas of concern where pullout would be possible.
Potentially, so I think we should do the analysis, figure out if somebody's willing to sell, how much impact would it have, what would it cost, and then say, are we willing to do this or not willing to do that? Because it can be easy, if the owner isn't gonna sell, then.
Move it a little more, Jake.
Move on, yeah.
Okay, right there.
What
But
about
if the owner
Founder's
is
Park?
going to,
So the Founder's Park is, we're not gonna do any, we're not gonna make any changes there.
Go a little more, Jake.
What Founder's Park?
William R.
sorry.
Smith Park.
No, that's it, Jake. So these are the next two that they proposed to improve. This one on the west side by the University Health Clinic. And this over here, although they proposed to move this one down here, because it doesn't, there's not a place to accommodate it in front of that building.
they want to move it where?
They want to move it down here,
In front of?
this parking lot area.
Parking lot of Don's Meats.
Parking lot of Don's Meats. And he looked at that and said, that looks problematic too.
And then the sixth one, Jake, up, keep going. Keep going. There's other bus stops, but these aren't among the six they're proposing to approve. Keep going, all the way down the pages and below. Okay, hold it, right there.
They're not proposing to improve any of the ones around Porter and Virginia?
No,
they're
the
not
six they're
heavily used.
proposing are based on, as I understand it, based on the volume of users.
And the ones that they would keep if BRT came in the future and they were farther apart probably too.
I don't know, they didn't say that.
Strictly ridership data.
But there was, in an earlier discussion, we proposed that there be one here,
Move the
but they
one.
want to move it down here.
He wasn't clear, yeah.
And
they
he
wa-
said down here could probably be put in without a pullout because there's enough shoulder
It's wide
there.
there,
Width of
yeah.
the road is such that,
But they want to put it in front of the Episcopal Church, not in front of Zapponi's Pizza.
oh, you're right, it'd be down here.
Or right on the corner of Episcopal Church,
Um,
which,
So those are the six they want to, they're proposing to improve with the pullouts. But again, UDOT's saying that some of those you could perhaps convince them don't need a pullout, or it's not practical or realistic. So where do we go from here? We have applications due September 8th, I think it is. Do we submit an application for 3 or 4 without saying exactly where, or without saying exactly the design? Or
What about the approach of asking for bus stop improvements on 400 West and 400 East so that there's no, at this point, until we have time to research it further, there's no question that we have final say and control?
so where would we get the match money? We'd have to put up the match money. UTA is willing to fund these Main Street ones. They're not proposing to fund 400 West or 400 East.
And I think that would be driven by ridership.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
there's one on 400 East by the Stake Center there that is fairly high
Heavily
ridership,
used.
but the person speaking for the church to this point has not been cooperative in wanting to have a shelter there, regardless of whether it takes right away or not. The shelter, from his view, would attract undesirables, but I don't know.
That doesn't seem like a hot spot for undesirables. Maybe that's me.
I'm just passing along the comments.
Yeah. This is a person associated with maintenance, and I think he
Yeah.
sees it as a maintenance adding to maintenance burden.
Sure.
People leaving trash and other.
Well, that may be it, yeah. That's probably it. Maybe the maintenance aspect.
Okay, so this is from Jacob's plan with UTA, and I talked to him about my concerns, and he said, the requirement is only for UDOT roads, and as such, we have started design on bus stops on city-owned street along 400 West and 400 East. I can send you those plans when I receive them. We have not obligated any funds to construction yet, but should know some of this information in the next 60 days. So 60 days is too long, but I wonder if, before we decide whether or not to submit specifically on bus stops and which streets we ask for, we could try to get more information if we could start there on the city-owned streets where we have a little more control. If
think
UTA
that's a
would
good
still
idea.
consider funding.
I think it's still a very viable option to get support. These are needed the most on Main Street.
I agree,
So I'd like to pursue
but I
that.
feel like it could wait a
I
year.
feel a little like the nose of a camel in a tent. And I
So you're not committing to doing a pullout if you ask
That's,
for money?
as long as we're clear on that, as long as if it gets approved and we say no to pullouts, but UDOT insists on one of these being a pullout, and then what happens at that point? If it's fully funded by
You don't-
UTA and the final decider is UDOT, where is our voice in that? Right, so then does it happen regardless?
I don't see it happening. Why would, can UTA just, you're saying, can UTA just go ahead and do this without us?
that's what we want to know.
Chris Peterson's principle, why would we ever want to do that? We don't like to do extra work without it. I think we would have to turn to
Because
UTA.
we get a particularly obnoxious rider who drives them crazy. You said why, that's why.
That is
I think we
one.
could discuss that with UTA, that this is our, and we can make that part of our application that.
Yeah.
that-
They were very-
that
I-
We're
I
not gonna
made-
take any county money.
Yeah.
Unless it's unless the city approves the design.
Exactly. I made a couple of phone calls. I talked to UTA people today. They were very supportive of making sure it's something we feel comfortable with. And so as long as that's understood and part of the application, then I'm fine with that.
Well, let me have some more dialogue with UTA then about this, and I could even hopefully.
And I had a voicemail from Eddie today that I didn't reply
Okay,
to, so.
between the mayor and I and.
We need to talk to Eddie about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll have ultimately 2 more meetings before the deadline. We'll have one on the 15th of August and then one on September 5th. So by then, we can refine it. And so
I'm not opposed to, I think we could be somewhat vague and say we choose among these bus stops.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to you.
Yeah, if you're supportive of the idea of 1250 West, then some of UTA's allocation for Centerville would go there. So they couldn't do all 6 anyway. And
Well, to me, the higher priority would be Main Street versus 1250, just based on, you know, the collection point for people and the usage currently. You have to walk a ways to get down to 1250. Now, granted, there are units down there, but I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that they're all pedestrian UTA riders, just based on the
no,
cars in the parking lot.
No, I mean, I'll be honest with you. It's the last mile policy, though, that would be a reason for UDOT to participate, and whether there's that many people who actually would use those facilities, as opposed to local folks who are walking to the theater or riding their bikes to the theater or that kind of thing. I think that's where you're going to get the greater usage, I'll admit. Not people going to the bus stop. But if UTA is willing to put some money there because of that policy, do you view it as advantageous that we enter into that kind of a partnership?
So I think if
So
the council's
that's what
agreeable, let's pursue the West Bountiful Centerville shared option. Let's come back with a plan for the Main Street bus stops option. And do we still submit the
Legacy.
the legacy restroom, but make it clear that we want this to be a county-owned,
So where we might kick in some money to as a match to help build it, but
Yeah.
we want on the condition the county would take.
Again, why not? Why not apply, but state that condition clearly and then see how it turns out.
Okay.
Okay.
You get a fishing expedition for all 3 is fine. And that's what you're doing at this point.
Yeah.
We don't know.
That's true.
I hesitate to ask in this meeting, maybe we'll save it for later, the priority of those 3. Why don't I come back and have a discussion with you later?
let's have more information. And I personally still think we could argue that the connection to the regional trail is the reason that we're improving that road, but that wasn't unanimously approved,
No, I
approved
saw
of in the council anyway,
division
so,
on the council
yeah.
on that. Aye.
So we'll just let that one sit for a bit.
Okay.
I don't have anything else on my report. I think I already reported on the Tingy Pavilion last time. So.
Okay. So you're on to me again?
Yep.
All right, we're looking for another recording secretary for the Planning Commission. It just proved to be, I think, more of a challenge than she thought, and
Katie, we appreciate you.
Katie makes it look easy.
It was taking her, the other recording secretary, much more time than she anticipated it would take. It's much more time than we're willing to pay for. So she could see that she just needed to resign and let us find somebody else.
Have we asked Katie if she knows anyone?
That's a twin or a
No, not a
couple?
twin, but that she, I mean,
No.
seemed like a good question to ask.
Well, she's going to help us out in the meantime, but I don't think that means she's interested in doing
I know
both
someone
long-term.
who's
Is that
done a
right,
lot of
Katie?
medical transcribing, that would probably be similar.
You know somebody like that? Well, anybody you think might be fit for that, well qualified for that, send them my way. Last time we advertised, we only got 4.
What's the pay?
Well, it's a pay range, and it's the equivalent pay range of a secretary 2 in our position, and so I think it's like,
It's about 17.
and then we add $2 an hour for the fact that they use their own equipment at home and they pay their own taxes, and because it's a contract position.
Contract.
So I think the beginning is like 15 something, if we start them at the minimum. If they have some really good experience, we can start them above that minimum, but minimum's like 15 and a half.
What's the expected hours?
Well, we did an analysis that showed that our experienced recording secretaries spend about between, at least I'm trying to remember, between 1 and 2 hours outside the meeting for every hour in the meeting.
That's when I smiled when you said expected hours, and that's 10:30.
But we expect somebody new, we give them maybe 2 to 3 hours outside for every hour in before I would consider it to be unreasonable. And then they speed up over time. Katie's clearly in that 1 to 2 hour range, right, Katie? Maybe closer down to 1 hour outside for every hour in. She's good.
It's amazing.
It's very good. Every time you're gone, I'm like, wow, Katie's.
Yeah. But the person we'll be replacing, she could not get it down to less than 3 hours outside for every hour in. And acknowledged that and just didn't want to continue to try to meet that. So if you know of anybody, might even possibly interested, send them my way.
Right.
Okay. Firebreak Road Maintenance, the meeting I've been referring to is a meeting the county called, invited Farmington and Centerville reps to come and talk about how do we fund some maintenance to improve some spots in the Firebreak Road. Not to bring them up to the standard of casual drivers, because we don't want to encourage that, but to improve them for firefighting access and law enforcement access. There are some spots that need some work. The 3 entities, well, the Weber Basin was there also represented, but their standard for the road is less than what we need it for firefighting access. So realistically, they're probably not going to be a partner in funding these improvements, but it would be Centerville, Farmington, and Davis County. There are initially, the Davis County staff have identified what they think might cost $100,000 to improve in Centerville and Farmington a number of spots. And that probably wouldn't even be done in 1 year. It would take a couple of years to do that. If you cost share that, one of the ways Centerville could satisfy its share is to provide asphalt millings off of its road projects. The county could provide equipment and operators. So it not necessarily means a cash outlay, but so we just had that initial discussion. There's going to be drafting of an agreement that will be brought to you for your consideration.
Did they talk about the existing MOU? Because, we did one.
Yes, I brought that up, so we looked at it. They have a copy of that. They were not up to date, familiar with that because of their more recent turnovers, but I gave them a copy of it, and that was back in 2006.
Was the
it?
latest I could find.
That was when there was some grant money from the Forest Service to do some improvements, and the other entities were kicking in. That's when we improved 100 South. We paved it up to the junction of the Fire Break Road, and we widened the culvert crossing on the Fire Break Road for Dual Creek. So that was really intended more for some specific improvements at the time with the help of some grant money. This is now more of an ongoing agreement that we want to enter into. But we'll have some more conversation with you when a draft is ready to circulate. I know the fire chief and the police chief would both be in favor of seeing some improvement for their access. The West Davis Corridor, EIS preferred alternative. The deadline is, I think, August 31st. The Farmington city manager approached me and asked if Centerville would be willing to submit a comment similar to the one they're going to submit. The interchange of the West Davis and the Legacy Parkway and I-15 at Glover. Let me go back to the map. It's getting late, sorry. This is Sheep Road right here. This is 650 West in Farmington. The West Davis Corridor, according to their conceptual plan, what they intend to build is, according to the plan, is the West Davis Corridor will go over 650 West, then it will come down and interrupt Sheep Road. That's why you see this cul-de-sac here and here. Farmington would like to encourage them to stay up and bridge over Sheep Road, just to preserve the possibility that someday that might be a useful connection, improved connection between the two communities, another connection in addition to the one we're wanting to do here with our 1250 West. Our police chief supports that idea. If we could convince them to stay up and bridge over Sheep rather than interrupting it.
They would just, the idea is that they would stay up the entire way.
Stay up until they get over here and then come
Right.
down.
And some of this, maybe they go down to grade and come back up.
That seems like a small distance to try to do that. But.
What they're showing now is that Sheep Road would have a connection over 650 West here. But apparently Farmington, who's initiated this request of us to support this idea, is that they'd like to convince UDOT to stay up over the Sheep Road, bridge over the Sheep Road. Do you have any objections to us submitting that kind of a comment?
No. No. Go for it.
Okay. Enough on that. May not go anywhere, but we can submit. Meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers regarding wetlands. I got a letter from the principal, so to speak, to go to the principal's office. Got a letter recently from the Army Corps of Engineers local office indicating that we were in violation of wetland rules because we were grading and filling the wetland area on this community park expansion area on the west end. So Bruce Cox and I went and met with them and convinced them that no, we haven't graded it and filled it, but we have been rotor-tilling to deal with the Phragmites. And Bruce was under the impression that that was an acceptable way to control the Phragmites in that wetland area. And he says that was based on a conversation one of our other employees had with Army Corps several years ago. But we were put straight that, no, you can't rotor-till those things. You can't because that's considered filling the wetland area. But we can mow it, we learned.
You can mow the wetlands, and that's okay.
But so Bruce is going to start mowing the wetland area and doing some herbicide application, selective herbicide to kill try to manage the Phragmites. But in case you had heard, we got a letter. I have to respond to that letter now, telling them, no, we didn't fill and blah, 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 and we're going to be good. We're not going to be fined.
In speaking to Gary Hatch about Phragmite and some of the things related to mosquito control, he'd mentioned to me the concept that wetland definition is based on where the water source is. If the water sources are man-made or then the classification isn't the same. Since those wetlands are effectively all runoff from Weber Water Basin, Dual Creek, and just households, is that really still truly wetland?
Well, we had the wetlands, we went through a study 5, 6, 7 years ago.
5 years ago.
Actually, we went through the study more than 5 years ago.
10 years ago.
10 years ago, and had the number of wetlands reduced on that 6 acres from 3 or 4 acres down to less than 1 acre on that west end. And so at that time, the arguments were made that, hey, the water has been coming from this ditch on the north side that is groundwater and rainwater, and a broken drain pipe on the south side. And then from the frontage road, water that spreads along the frontage road swell from different points. So, but we ended up with a redelineation that still identified that 0.7 acres, whatever it is, as wetlands. So we submitted that. We didn't, after 4 years or so, they had never responded. And so we asked again, and they finally approved the redelineation. Our consultant redefined it down to this 0.7 acres. And Army Corps just never responded for 4 years or so.
I want to do that with my emails.
And finally, when they did, that was 5 years ago. That's what Jake's referring to. So we got our redelineation approved 5 years ago. Anyway, that's where we are. I think we're out of trouble.
I'd ask for another redelineation. That's just mosquito breeding property now. It's not viable wetlands for anything.
Well, at this point.
It'll be 5 years down the road, but
yeah,
ask.
Yeah. Okay, volunteer appreciation dinner, Monday, September 25th. How does that sound?
Already in the calendar.
Okay, great. Guidance as to who to invite. We had a little concern last year that maybe we weren't inviting everybody we should. I have the list of the groups that we invited last year. The Citizen Corps, the Community Foundation, the 4th of July Committee, the main committee, the Landmarks Commission, the Parks and Rec Committee, the Trails Committee, the Whitaker Museum Board, Whitaker Museum volunteers, as defined by docents, and I think they wanted to bring a few other key volunteers who would put in a lot of significant time, in addition to their docents. And the Youth City Council, who actually came and helped serve. That's what their role was there. And then we had extra volunteers invited were the deer hunters, meaning the deer mitigation hunters. Hunter safety instructors, Norm and Nina Beers, who for years have given their time voluntarily to teach hunter safety. And Bob and Chris Brown, cemetery flags every year. So I guess my question is, who are we missing? And there is a question from the July 4th committee chair. They've had some of their subcommittee chairs ask, could we invite some of our people? And I guess my response to that would be, if they're judged to be some of their key volunteers, not just any volunteer, but those who are maybe their lieutenants, so to speak, in carrying out some of these more major activities like the parade and the breakfast. We can accommodate a few more. So if you're okay, we'll allow a little discretion there. You want to give any guidance?
So who are we leaving out?
Well, the hundreds of volunteers who help with the July 4th celebration. And I'm sure there's others. The other museum volunteers who maybe put in a few hours, but not substantial hours. It's a gray.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the gray a little bit.
So are you trying to say numerically, I'm just throwing this out, this is not what so anyone less than 30 hours isn't enough of a volunteer? I'm trying to get around that. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm asking.
That's what that's we're trying to understand briefly, without a whole lot of.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were 19 and a half, you can't come.
I mean, here's an approach I could take. I could have the main contacts for these groups say, look, you want to suggest to me other key volunteers that you think have really put in a lot of time without committing, and just let those people, let those leaders, if you will, suggest to me here's why, and see what kind of numbers I get and whether it fits budget-wise. I don't know how much discretion you want to give me, or you want to draw the line yourself. I suspect you probably don't want to try to draw the line, do you? But I'm going to have to make some judgment, so.
It's a lot better to blame it on someone else.
If you're willing to let me go through that process and make some judgment, as long as I ask these key people in charge of these activities, okay, how many other key volunteers would you like to invite? And after I get those numbers, then I can kind of size it up. And
That sounds good.
any advice for me?
So
if there's any heartburn, then.
One of the ones that was a sticky issue last year was the crossing guards, as I recall.
Well, they're paid.
They're employees, they come to the employee dinner.
And they come to the Christmas dinner.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. Okay, unless you have further direction, I'll run with that. Now, the work session regarding parks and cemetery. I had suggested that we could move that up to the 15th of August, have that be discussion before your next regular meeting. The only reason I suggested.
Phone call to at least me, and I don't know who else today.
Who did?
I did.
Tammy.
I think we should wait until after we have the information of whether or not we've received the grant, so that we can more absolutely fully dive into the question and have that piece of information in place.
Yeah, there's a dilemma here, because I know Corey's feeling pressure. The Planning Commission is wanting to get to the end of their process, but now that the council has dived into the issue.
Well, I don't know.
Well, we were supposed to be in the issue originally, because we were going to be invited to that open house, but then we weren't.
In my mind, though, what the Planning Commission is doing over on Pages Lane, and if they want to talk the possibility of parks, they can be free to do that. And it doesn't have to cross over with the cemetery question, which I think is a little trickier and more sensitive. So I would say let them continue and finish their Pages Lane deliberation. I mean, if anything, we know as a city that we're severely underparked according to standards. So
I think some of us would question that.
Yeah,
right.
I agree with that.
According to national standards of acres of park. So
Is that somewhat like the national standards for union firefighters, where you're never going to meet them? And
10 acres per 1,000 residents.
Now, are you aware of the research that's been done and reported to the Planning Commission on that?
No.
Okay, well, you might want to review that and then.
Okay. Well, anyway, so my point is that I say that we.
Per 1,000 residents or per 100,000?
Per.
Per 1,000? That doesn't make any sense.
Anyway, so my point is that the Planning Commission is looking at that entire block and what they think best uses will be. And I think that should be independently decided for that block, and they can move forward with their discussion there without it getting intertwined with these other big questions. The cemetery question isn't a matter for the Planning Commission so much right now, I don't think anyway, so. Right.
Well, I'm not adverse to slowing down the number of work sessions we have back to back to back, so.
So, I mean, One question for the planning commission though, when they plan the park over there, do they have any thought about how we pay for it?
Well, the staff's been trying to, in an objective fashion, give them information to help them make an informed decision. It's a really difficult situation for Corey. And when he saw that the city council was interested in talking about parks and versus cemetery, Island View Park versus a park on Pages, he is feeling very uncomfortable about coming to the end of the planning commission's process, knowing that the council assuming that the council may have some of its own ideas. And so he was hoping to more dovetail the two before he got to the end of the process with the planning commission.
No, sorry to cut you off. I think a high-level discussion is a good idea. I think the more we are looking at everything up front, the better off we are. And realistically...
So you want to have a work session with the planning commission?
No, I don't want a work session with the planning commission. I'd like to have a work session, though.
But I wouldn't want to do anything that could screw up what's in process.
I'm not sure that it would. I mean, if we say, here we are thinking about doing something else, the only thing that, I mean, it's not like they're going to say, okay, then we're not going to let you have the money for doing what you say you want to do. If we change our minds, then we don't get the money.
I think one of the,
I think there's and it sounds like there wasn't a lot of competition for the money anyway. So if we wanted it, then we could have it. So I'm not sure.
This is the discussion I don't want to be having absolutely right now, but
back to the planning commission process, I actually think one of the weaknesses that's going on right now in our process is the planning commission feels a little bit too directed by some of the political goals and objectives, and I think that it's healthier for the planning commission to finish their process as we've asked them to do, to just evaluate that whole block and give us a recommendation. And then we have to evaluate it with the realities of costs and other needs and all of that. But I'd like to hear what they have to say without them trying to read our minds about what they think we might say back.
Even if it's pie in the sky and not...
Well, no, I want them to stay grounded in reality, and I've had a very serious concern that they're not. But I know that the reason they're not is because they were trying to have a truly open grassroots process, and they heard in that open house and from citizens, we'd really like a park. So I think they felt obligated to explore that.
Well, and now that they perceive that some of the elected officials are in that
And I think
vein.
it's premature to perceive that because so let them finish their process.
And I'm okay with that. I just kind of asking for your direction on this. Do we hold off?
I think the planning commission process is its own, separate from ours. But I don't think that prohibits us from talking about it. Because what we're hearing is that the public would really like us to explore the idea. So I think in all due diligence, we ought to look at the opportunity and say, is it even feasible?
Right.
And I don't think that is at all related to the grant. And if it is related to the grant, then it's probably a good thing to do it now rather than later. Because right now, we don't have the money, and that grant is not money in our pocket. It's reimbursement after we spend it. And it doesn't cover the whole thing. It'll cover just under 60%. So there's a lot of cost issue with that, according to, I mean, when I look at our current budget, I don't see us being able to.
So the suggestion was to delay the work session until after we hear about the grant. When will we hear about the grant?
September or October.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I don't know
3 months?
if you're aware of this,
2 maximum.
but because of a contact made by somebody with the state parks, and I don't know who that somebody was, State Parks called Bruce Cox and asked the question, are you still serious about this grant application on Island View Park? And so Bruce assured him that yes, we are. So we need to be careful about any messages that might be sent before they make this grant decision.
I think it's a fair point, but we can't single thread the process that much. We've got a lot to do. The cemetery it's not necessarily a competing objective, it's complementary in some ways. So I think I would be hesitant to, I guess if the parks is that spooked by us discussing alternatives, that's another problem. I'm concerned that if we wait too long, we'll be deep into another construction season before we have any kind of plan. And we still have the Planning Commission to bring in on this with what the alternatives are. I think as far as letting the Planning Commission run their process independent, yes, that's why they're there. As far as the signaling issue, brainstorming, they need to be able to be free to do that, whether it crosses reality or not.
Right.
That's brainstorming in general, right? So, I don't know.
And I don't think brainstorming on our part is all that detrimental either.
It's not. I think we need to speak with one voice when we go to apply for something or contact another state agency. We don't want different people contacting, giving different messaging. But so the question before us, do you want to have the work session in August or September?
I think I'm hearing the preponderance is to hold off, right?
I'd feel comfortable. I mean, the difference between August and September is a month. We might know by mid-September, so we could do this second meeting in September. I'd feel more comfortable with that. I'd feel comfortable even going to October. I'm thoroughly supportive of exploring all options. I think there's a little bit of confusion about what's been applied for, and so, I mean, basically right now, I got in.
So you want to wait 2 months?
I want to wait.
Okay. What do you want to do, Bill?
I think I'm not opposed to waiting a while. I don't know about 2 months.
Stephanie, what about you?
Well, let me finish one more thing. Forewarned with what Tammy has told us, let's keep this conversation very close to the vest until we have some thought.
Maybe we shouldn't broadcast it on the internet.
Well,
I don't think.
I don't mind not having a meeting work meeting next time, but I suspect that we've got plenty of things lined up that we can do it.
That's the problem with transparent government, is sometimes you can be too transparent. I think the issue that I hope Bruce communicated back is there's no directive from the council to change that.
Right. He did.
And various council members go out and they talk to, I mean, we have people who go to other board meetings and ask questions. That, as long as they're not representing this is the will of the council or this is the directive.
Yep.
Got to be given that latitude, otherwise we're hamstrung to only show up as a group wherever we go.
That's reasonable.
So you want to have it August or September?
Well, maybe the question only needs to go so far as we're not going to have it on the 15th of August. And let's see how the Planning Commission proceeds with their process.
I'm fully in support of that.
Sounds good.
Okay, all right.
Does that mean we're meeting about something else next time?
I hope not.
Means another budget work session.
Another budget work session.
We have that extra meeting, remember?
Next week, we have that meeting. So hopefully on the 15th, no work session is my hope.
Well, we start at 6 anyway with the open house.
Right, so.
Well, next week.
Yeah.
That's next week, yeah.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Miscellaneous business. You got the note about ULCT.
Just
if you want to go, let Marcia know quick.
try to make a decision sooner rather than later.
I'm a yes. Could you pass that to her?
Yeah, I'll have her contact you then.
As always, I highly recommend taking the time. They're very valuable. Bill, do you find them valuable?
Yeah, I have. The problem is I got a lot of competition for time.
Yeah, you do. You got to actually show up to work every once in a while.
Once in a while.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we can register you later after the initial deadline. I'm not trying to say we can't, it's just, if you can make a decision sooner, it'll save us some money on the penalty fees.
So the 10th of August?
What was in the,
I think
I think something like that, yeah.
I'm a no for that.
Okay.
I'm a tentative no, although I'll see if I'm really teaching that day, so.
Okay.
So the thing isn't the 10th of August, that's
The
the
deadline.
registration deadline, yeah.
Yeah, the deadline.
September 13th through 15th are the dates.
Okay. That's it for me.
Okay, it looks like we don't have the Chad Morris easements, right? Was previous. So, do we need, I'm not aware of a need for a closed meeting.
Nope.
So the only other thing I have is we have an opening on the Parks and Rec Committee. Matt Layton, who's been a vigorous supporter and volunteer in our baseball program. Technically, he's a paid volunteer. He feels like he would like a baseball voice on the Parks and Rec Committee. They have a lot of issues around scheduling fields and kind of conflicts between uses and where we're going. He's obviously a big advocate for Parks and Recreation. Leslie Flowers also applied.
And she's a big baseball voice as well.
She's a very strong personality.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't talked to Leslie yet about this. I talked to Matt. He would like to do it, but he understands if the council wants Leslie to do it. But I'd like to maybe speak with Leslie first. And
Well, and Matt applied of
Would
his own
Matt want
volition
to-
first, right?
he did.
Is Matt wanting to do that in addition or
Yeah,
instead?
no, in addition.
My initial thought was, who's going to take Matt's place with baseball?
No, Matt's
So
Matt's
that was
still,
my
he'll
concern.
still be the
Okay.
baseball.
Well, I know Leslie very well. She's my neighbor across the street, highly involved in the program. Definitely, if you want to talk to her, I think that's a great thing. I would like to just advocate for, let's not always use the same 10 people. She's got a different perspective and a different voice. Definitely going to be advocating very heavily for the baseball. I did explain to her that there are other Parks and Rec programs that go along with this. So she's not single focused on that, but she recognized that as one of our big programs, and there's a lot of kids involved. So she'd like to do a good job related to that. The rest will come in time, I think.
Okay.
And we don't have a baseball-specific voice right now, so I think either of the options it's good to have that mix.
That's a good idea.
So,
So are you going to talk to them and then come with a name next time?
I probably should talk to, in fairness to Leslie, I probably should talk to her first. And, I'm very confident Matt knows how to work on a committee and play ball together and would make a significant contribution.
I think Leslie would do the same. Like I can vouch for her personality. She is a very giving person. I think in some cases, she and her husband give a lot that's unrecognized in the community, both financially and of their time. She's really a catch. The fact that she's willing to serve is fantastic.
So if we have two great candidates, how do we decide? I mean, we leave that up to the mayor,
Well,
right?
it's for him to recommend. I look at it this way: we got one captive through being paid, and we got one who's willing to volunteer unpaid. Because I told her there's no remuneration for this. So I think we get the best of both worlds.
I'll make a recommendation to you, and you can respond to that. Lastly, I have 2 tickets to the Tour of Utah VIP tent in Bountiful on Friday. Did you hear back from Michael?
He called me back and said that he wasn't able to connect with his employees, but he's gonna do it in the morning.
Okay.
So I said, you would mention this tonight. If there's anybody interested in him, it would be subject to his answer to me tomorrow, whether there's 2 Parks employees that wanna use him.
My preference would be to give it to the Parks employees who are putting up the banners for them, or we have a couple of serious bike enthusiasts on the Trails Committee that might really value them.
Sure, it's true.
Unless somebody is dying to go.
It's a riot to go there. Just,
But do you want
but I don't want the VIP
I think it's a
tickets.
good incentive for those who are putting in the effort.
Okay. So is Michael gonna?
Well, yeah, he's gonna call me in the morning, but the issue is if there isn't anybody, does somebody on this group want to take him?
Or are you okay? I'm sure that somebody on the Trails Committee will take it.
Go right ahead.
All right.
So I'm gonna leave these with you on the front desk, because I'm going out of town.
Oh, okay.
But,
All right. So try the Trails Committee if
well,
somebody in
maybe I'll
Parks.
send out a text before I
Okay.
leave, and I'm sure that, our current chair is Remington? Our
I'm
past-
not on there, I don't know. Is it, I thought it was
Oh,
Mark. Robin would know.
Our past chair was Mark
Diamond.
Diamond, and
Is it Remington?
for that, Mark Olischlager. Any of them would probably jump the chip. Okay. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
All right.
You don't get a vote, Lisa.
Now we vote on the adjournment.